Warrior Lore, Chapter 2589. Just in time. Qianemo and the other two were already on high alert. Their respective magic treasures had already been prepared. Seeing that LV Ruochang had finally made his move, their hearts skipped a beat. Without any hesitation, the three magic treasures in their hands flew up into the air. Under the magnificent brilliance, they emitted a buzzing sound as they flew towards the phoenix sword will. Qianmo's hand was pointing towards a dark purple magic treasure. It was in the shape of a pentagon. This pentagon wasn't uniform. Instead, the front three horns shot out like antennae. At the back, the two legs were slightly curled up. It looked like an inkstone, but there was a definite difference. This was Qianmo's natal magic treasure, the lightning flash. As Qianmo chanted the incantation, the pentagonal lightning flash emitted a crackling sound. The surrounding spiritual energy of heaven and earth condensed into a hurricane and poured into it. Under the faint purple brilliance, the hair-thin lightning gradually appeared. Moreover, as the lightning flash grew, the lightning also increased in size. Finally, it reached the thickness of a thumb. The most shocking thing was that as Qianmo chanted the incantation, the lightning flash emitted an indescribable fluctuation. The fluctuation rushed up to the 9 heavens and actually affected the weather. In the sky, the wind and rain suddenly changed. Countless gales swept past and dark clouds instantly covered the sky. Within these dark clouds, lightning began to condense and faintly, the sound of thunder flashed through the clouds. Attack! Qianmo's face was dignified. Seeing that the lightning flash had already expanded to several feet, his mouth changed the incantation again. The incantation in his hand was also formed. As Qianmo pointed his hand, a purple brilliance shot into the lightning flash. The lightning flash emitted a buzzing sound and began to revolve. A layer of lightning as thick as a thumb formed a net from within the lightning flash. With a whistling sound, it rushed towards the incoming phoenix sword will. Looking at Kunlun sect's Yuan Zhengyu, seeing that LV Ruochang had already made his move, he had already reached into his storage pouch and took out a 3 feet long sword. This treasure sword was different from ordinary flying swords. It had no edge and was not sharpened. A layer of purple-red light faintly appeared on the sword. At the hilt of the sword, there was a thumb-sized purple-red crystal embedded on it. From the crystal up, countless strange lightning-like runes appeared one after another. As the runes flickered, traces of lightning were produced. In just a moment, the entire treasure sword was covered in lightning. Looking from afar, Yuan Zhengyu looked like a god holding lightning in his hand. The strangest thing was that as Yuan Zhengyu chanted the incantation, his body began to walk in large strides in the air. It was the steps of the Big Dipper. Following Yuan Zhengyu's incantation, another kind of celestial phenomenon condensed in the sky. Bursts of whirlwinds appeared out of thin air. 7 strange demonic clouds flashed within the whirlwinds. Between each cloud, there were flashes of lightning. The rumbling sound was even more arrogant than the thunder clouds that Qianmo had attracted. This Yuan Zhengyu was actually using the extremely rare thunder attraction technique of Kunlun sect. The heavenly lightning that was attracted by the sword was somewhat similar to Xiao Hua's lightning manipulation technique. Quick, Yuan Zhengyu chanted the incantation. After the Big Dipper step was completed, he raised his hand and pointed the lightning-like sword. Kachacha, 7 heavenly lightning struck down from the sky. Following the direction of the sword, it struck towards the left wing of the phoenix sword will. Lastly, looking at Jihong, it was even more strange than Yuan Zhengyu's thunder attraction technique. However, when she felt the sensation of the phoenix sword will piercing her skin, she immediately stretched out her hand. Not towards her storage pouch, but towards her own neck. A long string of pearls was taken out from her snow-white neck. The string of pearls was actually a string of snow-white pearls. The string of pearls was only the size of a pinky finger. When Jihong chanted the incantation, the string of pearls flew into the air, swaying with a milky white brilliance. The surrounding spiritual energy of heaven and earth was also stirred into chaos. The string of pearls rapidly expanded, and within the brilliance, a faint red mist was produced. Within the red mist, the string of pearls revealed its true appearance. That was actually 81 lifelike human skulls. Roar! The 81 human skulls roared in unison. In the air, they flipped with a milky white brilliance. Like glaring vajras, they fearlessly rushed towards the right side of the phoenix sword will. Hiss, seeing the different divine abilities of the three golden core cultivators, Lu Ruochang's heart was slightly startled. He knew that the Dao sect's magic was incomparably mystical and far from what sword cultivators could compare to. Kill. Lu Ruochang's beautiful eyebrows straightened. The sword origin within his body rapidly surged out. The phoenix sword will let out a soft whistle and rushed into the lightning net of Qian Mo's lightning flash. Crackle. Crackle. A series of sounds, as if countless tidal waves were slapping against the reefs of the sea, were annihilated at the same time. At the same time, Qian Mo's lightning net was also washed away. The waves of qi that soared to the heavens surged in midair, even causing the swordsmen and cultivators who were fighting near the earthen city to be overturned. However, there was still about 20% of the sword light that passed through the lightning net and still pierced towards Qian Mo. Qian Mo was not surprised by this situation. Once again, he pointed his finger. The lightning flash tilted slightly, and a stream of light purple liquid flowed out from the lightning flash. Following the direction of Qian Mo's incantation, it rushed towards the 20% of the sword light. Lightning? Lightning water? Lu Ruochang may not have known, but Yuan Zhengyu, who was attacking Lu Ruochang from the side, involuntarily cried out. His 7 bolts of sky lightning struck the left wing of the phoenix sword will, forcefully destroying the flying swords on the left side of the phoenix sword will. Only about 10% of the sword light escaped from the sky lightning and struck towards Yuan Zhengyu. Yuan Zhengyu did not dare to be careless with this 10% of the sword light. Yuan Zhengyu's body flashed with an intense brilliance. As he endured the pain of the sky lightning's backlash, he waved his treasured sword again. The remaining sky lightning energy within the treasured sword was drawn out by him using a secret technique. It formed a several zhang wide barrier in front of him, blocking off this 10% of the sword light. It was also at this moment that he saw the lightning water pouring out from Qian Mo's lightning flash. He almost could not believe his own eyes. As the saying goes, sky lightning is formless and can kill all living things in the world. Being able to control sky lightning was a great ability among cultivators. Although the Imperial Thunder Sect was known as the Imperial Thunder Sect, there were not many who had the ability to control sky lightning. Compared to the Imperial Thunder Sect, the Kunlun Sect was a cultivation sect with a longer history. This lightning-attracting technique was one of the secret techniques of the sect. If not for Yuan Zhengyu's great fortune and his physique being compatible, he would not have received the grace of the sect and received this secret technique of lightning-attracting technique. Yuan Zhengyu had always been very proud of his lightning-attracting technique and did not put the sanctimonious Qian Mo in his heart. At the same time, he also did not put the Imperial Thunder Sect in his heart. He felt that the Imperial Thunder Sect was a sect that relied on the lightning escape technique and could not be compared to the Kunlun Sect, which relied on the heavenly thunder spell. However, at this moment, seeing Qian Mo's magic weapon condensing lightning water, how could he not be astonished? At this moment, no one in the crowd was clearer than him about the difficulty of controlling sky lightning. Not to mention that he had to step on the 7 stars and recite the mantra. If there was even the slightest mistake, the sky lightning would directly strike him, causing his soul to scatter. Even if he succeeded in attracting sky lightning water, his original treasure sword would also have to bear a small portion of the sky lightning's power. Although the power was light, it would directly strike the body, the heart meridians, and the soul. The feeling of being struck by sky lightning water was something that could not be described to outsiders. Attracting sky lightning water was already so difficult. Then wouldn't it be even more difficult to condense sky lightning water? Regardless of how hard Yuan Zhengyu racked his brains, he still could not understand how Qian Mo could use a magic weapon to condense sky lightning water. Perhaps, Qian Mo's magic weapon was created by imitating the Imperial Thunder Sect's lightning pool? A trace of jealousy flashed across Yuan Zhengyu's eyes. He watched as the sky lightning water condensed into a thin layer of defense under Qianmo's control. It was similar to his own sky lightning water. When the 20% of the sword light rushed into the sky lightning water, it was immediately annihilated and did not cause any ripples. That nameless Imperial Thunder Sect Golden Core Cultivator. What is he relying on to attract sky lightning water and not be devoured by it? Yuan Zhongyu was jealous, but at the same time, he could not understand how Xiao Hua could directly attract sky lightning water without using a magic weapon. Let's not talk about the two Dao sect cultivators using their own sect's secret techniques and controlling the sky lightning water to destroy LV Ruochang's Phoenix Sword Will. Let's talk about Clear Leaf sect's Jihong. The 81 skeletons with the might of a Vajra rushed to the right side of the Phoenix Sword Will and scattered. Like a mysterious array, the skeletons each emitted a milky white brilliance from their eyes, mouth, and nose. This brilliance was somewhat similar to Xiao Hua's Buddha light, but it was much more domineering than the Buddha light. When the sword light condensed from the Phoenix Sword Will's right wing landed within this milky white brilliance, it was immediately absorbed by the white brilliance and entered the mouth and nose. Crunch, 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 it was like a chewing sound. The sword light that could kill a golden core cultivator, the sword light that contained LV Ruochang's sword will, was actually swallowed by the 81 skeletons. Looking from afar, it was as if the 81 skeletons were lying on top of the Phoenix Sword Will and had completely swallowed the right side of the Phoenix Sword Will. Jie, the Phoenix Sword Will wailed and shook rapidly. A thin and long dark green sword that was only a foot long was revealed. It was LV Ruochang's flying sword. Ha ha ha, you are indeed impressive. LV Ruochang waved his hand, and the small flying sword quickly flew back. The Golden Core cultivators in the conference hall, even if they are only in the middle stage of the Golden Core realm, they are definitely not to be underestimated. I admit that I was too careless previously. However, in my eyes, all of you are merely spells that borrow external forces to achieve your own strength. My flying sword of sword cultivators cannot be compared to them. Then LV Ruochang said proudly, how about this? I will only use 3 moves. If all of you can dodge these 3 moves, I will spare your lives. Humph, could it be that all sword cultivators are people who only know how to talk? Qianmo activated the liquid lightning and turned it into a biscuit in mid-air. This biscuit was divided into 8 pieces, similar to the 8 trigrams. The 8 pieces of liquid lightning swelled slightly and emitted a faint sound of thunder. This sound of thunder was light, but it was enough to move one's heart and soul. Qianmo looked at LV Ruochang coldly and said, previously, you only used your mouth to delay. Now, you still want to rely on your mouth to gain the upper hand? Haha, ignorant child. LV Ruochang's figure flickered, and countless emerald green sword lights shot out like a sword pillar. Not only did they pierce through the surrounding heaven and earth spiritual qi, they even pierced through the heavenly phenomenon that Qianmo and Yuan Zhongyu had conjured. -9. Chapter 2590. Wang. Immediately after, the countless sword pillars fell down again, smashing onto the small sword in front of LV Ruochang. After the small sword let out a sword cry, a sword light flashed, and a huge phoenix sword intent was born again. Fight! Qianmo glanced at Yuan Zhongyu and Jihong. His hand was the first to cast a spell. The 8 trigrams formed by the water of lightning rotated slightly, slowly flying towards the incomplete phoenix sword intent. It was an extreme confinement, and an indescribable deterrence was born from the water of lightning, firmly enveloping the phoenix sword intent. Separate, LV Ruochang did not care about Qianmo's attack. She chanted a sword spell, and the flying sword within the phoenix sword intent shook slightly. 2 similarly emerald small swords were born from the phoenix sword intent and flew out. The tips of the swords were pointed at Yuan Zhongyu and Jihong. The method of the transformation of the flying swords was somewhat similar to Xiao Hua's. Wang. When the 2 flying swords were born, the sword pillars that previously rushed up to the sky also smashed down. In the midst of the sword cries of the 2 flying swords, 2 identical phoenix sword intents were born at the same time. Hiss! Seeing this, Yuan Zhongyu and Jihong could not help but suck in a breath of cold air. If it was a normal fight, needless to say, they would definitely turn around and escape at this time. The further they could escape, the better. They secretly prayed that they would not be caught by this third-grade illusory sword female swordsman. However, at this time, tens of thousands of cultivators were still fighting. They could only brace themselves and face the battle. Kill. Yuan Zhongyu's figure swayed again. Although he was fast, there was no lack of stability. He did not dare to make the slightest mistake in his footsteps. The lightning in his hand was still gradually flickering, echoing with the 7 red clouds in the sky. Above the red clouds, an intense brilliance was gradually born. Ji Hong's magic treasure was still emitting a faint brilliance, but at this time, the 81 skulls expanded again and even began to slowly move, forming a formation in front of Ji Hong. That milky white brilliance had almost turned into a dense curtain of light, protecting Ji Hong's surroundings tightly. LV Ruochang's face was slightly pale. It seemed that he had used up too much of his sword origin to condense the Earth City. Jie, with a sword cry, the phoenix sword intent once again soared into the sky and flew towards the 3 of them. Quick, seeing that the phoenix sword will was even stronger than before, Qianmo did not dare to be careless. He hurriedly mobilized all the magic power in his body and continuously poured it into the flash of lightning. Moreover, he also made a hand seal, and the heavenly lightning in the sky was also drawn into the flash of lightning. From within the flash of lightning, traces of lightning water slowly flowed out. Woo! Boom! Kacha! A series of chaotic, thunderous sounds resounded. Light purple lightning splashed in all directions. The emerald green sword light also flashed rapidly. The shaking wind brushed against the face, and the momentum scattered in all directions. The thin layer of lightning water was like hot oil that had been poured with cold water. After the phoenix sword intent rushed into the lightning water, it began to explode. In the blink of an eye, endless explosive sounds rang out, and the lightning water exploded into pieces. Of course, the gigantic phoenix sword intent was also destroyed. A beam of green sword light flashed across the sky and pierced towards Qianmo without restraint. The sword light was really like lightning. Just as Qianmo's blood was surging, his meridians felt like they were being cut by knives, and even his hands and feet were somewhat numb. The sword light suddenly came. Qianmo turned pale with fright. He forced himself to use his flying technique. A shadow flashed past, and the lightning directly hit the flying sword. Qianmo's body also narrowly avoided it. Ha ha ha, the lightning evasion technique is indeed impressive. LV Ruochang waved his hand, and the green flying sword no longer attacked. Instead, it slowly flew back. Qianmo's heart endured for a while, but in the end, he did not dare to use the flash of lightning to intercept the flying sword. Quick, Qianmo's body flew up, and both of his hands were making hand seals. The brilliance of the flash of lightning flashed, and a huge suction force rushed into the sky. Within the dark clouds, lightning flashed and frequently entered the flash of lightning. Qianmo's lightning water was easily defeated by LV Ruochang's phoenix sword intent. How good would Yuan Zhongyu and Ji Hong be? However, although Yuan Zhongyu's 7 lightning bolts were also incomparably strong and contained an endless amount of heavenly lightning energy, under the impact of the phoenix sword intent, a series of thunderous explosions were born from within the lightning bolts. It was even stronger than Qianmo's lightning water. Although the phoenix sword intent was finally struck by the lightning bolts, it still rushed out of the lightning bolts and pierced towards Yuan Zhongyu. The sky was filled with killing intent, and Yuan Zhongyu's entire body was enveloped. Yuan Zhongyu tried his best to wave his sword, and the power of lightning on the sword was also very strong. However, Yuan Zhongyu's Taoist robe was still pierced by the sword light. Golden light flashed around his body, and his body was sent flying by the huge force. He almost couldn't stand still in midair. See, when the sword light dissipated, Yuan Zhongyu let out a long breath. His gaze fell on the sword in his hand that had already returned to its original state. Third-grade illusory sword. It really lives up to its reputation. Yuan Zhongyu sighed inwardly. Then, he thought, Li Zongbao, that little bastard, actually managed to kill a third-grade illusory sword. Where did his luck come from? Yuan Zhongyu was so weak, let alone Jihong. The pale white brilliance of the 81 skeletons was torn apart by LV Ruochang's flying sword without a trace. Among them, nearly 10 skeletons were torn apart by the sword light. At this moment, Jihong's Taoist robe was full of holes. If it wasn't for her protective golden light and a defensive treasure, she was afraid that the attack just now would have taken her life. A sword cultivator's attack power is indeed unparalleled in the world. Jihong's face was slightly flushed, and her blood and qi were surging. She thought to herself, Qianemo and Yuan Zhongyu were also prepared. This lightning magic is really the nemesis of sword cultivators. Jihong understood very well. Her cultivation level was not inferior to the two of them. The reason why there was such a difference was definitely because of the difference in magic and treasures. Fight! Jihong looked at the clear leaf sect disciples who were still fighting fiercely, and a trace of ruthlessness appeared in her eyes. She waved her hand, and the remaining 70 skeletons flew back to her side. They shrunk into the shape of a string of pearls again. Pooh! Jihong opened her mouth and spat out a mouthful of essence blood, which landed evenly on the string of pearls. Woo! A strange cold wind blew, and the 70 skeletons abruptly expanded at an extremely fast speed. Moreover, red blood threads flashed within the milky white brilliance. The faint red smoke from before became even denser. Moreover, there was a faint red light emitting from the sockets of the skeleton's eyes. Quick! Jihong's technique was not limited to that. She raised her hand, and 10 rays of brilliance hit the skeletons. The fist-sized skeletons let out a woo-woo sound, and like moths to a flame, they pounced towards Jihong. When they arrived in front of Jihong, they bared their pale white teeth and bit down on her body. At this moment, a trace of hesitation appeared on Jihong's face. When she looked at Qianemo and Yuan Zhongyu, her eyes flashed with a trace of shame and anger. She waved her hand, and a golden light flashed around her body. It was the light of a protective barrier that forced the 70 skeletons away. Since the skeletons were forced away, they once again bared their fangs and brandished their claws, flying forward. However, this time, the skeletons were different from before. The faint red blood on each skeleton gradually expanded, covering the entire skeleton. The 70 skeletons turned into 70 faint red balls. Rise! Jihong immediately took out a milky white elixir and threw it into her mouth. The brilliance on her hand shone again, and she hit the 10 skeletons separately. Ga-ga, dozens of ear-piercing screeches rang out, and the 70 or so skeletons instantly swelled up like bubbles. Moreover, these bubbles became increasingly inflated with the abundance of heaven and earth spiritual qi, and in the blink of an eye, they condensed into something that looked like a human head. There were muscles and skin on the head, but they were all pink in color. The faint red glowing eyes were filled with the desire to devour like a wild beast. Seeing the 70 skeletons growing out, LV Ruochang's eyes flashed with a trace of surprise. His cold voice sounded, "Everything is but an illusion. Everything still depends on one's own strength." Just as his voice fell, LV Ruochang's entire body was surrounded by sword light. The countless sword pillars from before once again shot up into the sky. However, within this light pillar, there was a faint phoenix sword light dancing within. It was obvious that LV Ruochang had already infused his sword will into this sword pillar. Just like before, the sword pillar crashed down and hit the 3 flying swords. The jade-green phoenix sword will was once again born from the flying swords. This time, the 3 phoenixes had shrunk by more than half. However, within the sword will condensed from the 3 swords, the phoenix's will to tilt the world was even more intense. Go! LV Ruochang did not hesitate at all. When the phoenix sword will was fully formed, he immediately waved his hand and the sword energy within his body flew out continuously. The phoenix sword will made a clear "jie" sound and once again rushed towards Qianemo and the other 2. Just as the phoenix sword will was activated, LV Ruochang put his index and middle fingers together and raised them in front of his eyes. An extremely strange sword technique was born between his fingers. The phoenix sword will that had already flown up suddenly opened its eyes. Although its phoenix eyes were chaotic, a strange sword light was born from these eyes. When Qianmo saw that the phoenix sword intent was charging towards him, he hurriedly activated his technique. The lightning flash flickered, and the lightning water once again poured out, turning into a thin layer of thunder that blocked in front of the phoenix sword intent. In fact, after the lightning water within the lightning flash was consumed, Qianmo once again activated the lightning flash, horizontally blocking in front of him. The lightning in the sky was attracted by the horizontal lightning flash, blocking the path of the phoenix sword intent. The second move. LV Ruochang coldly shouted. Rumble. In the blink of an eye, a portion of the sword light was annihilated by the lightning water. The remaining sword light stubbornly passed through the lightning water and stabbed into the lightning flashes. Kachacha. The lightning flashes on the lightning flashes wanted to block the phoenix sword will. However, the thousands of sword lights crazily hit the lightning flashes. This extremely rare magic treasure flashed violently and blocked the sword light. The body of Zheng Wuxing was also sent flying by the lightning flashes more than 10 feet away. -9. Chapter 2591. Seeing this, Qianmo unconsciously let out a sigh of relief. However, before he could relax, another change occurred. The eyes of the phoenix that was flickering with a strange sword light once again flashed intensely. 2 light green sword lights were emitted from the phoenix's eyes and merged into one in front of the phoenix's lightning flash, transforming into a small sword that was about an inch long. It streaked across the sky and charged towards Qianmo. An indescribable sense of danger arose from the bottom of Qianmo's heart. Not good. Qianmo seemed to have realized the danger of this flying sword and hurriedly activated lightning flash. Large amounts of lightning were emitted from the clouds and smashed towards the small sword. Unfortunately, the small sword seemed to be formless and was completely unaffected by the lightning. Before it could reach Qianmo's forehead again, it was about to pierce through his forehead. Qianmo's protective glow seemed to be unable to block it. What kind of flying sword is this? Qianmo's face turned pale with fright as he retreated rapidly. At the same time, he clapped his hands and a talisman appeared in his hands. Without hesitation, he activated his magic power and a large hand appeared in midair along with the talisman's destruction. This was the protective talisman that Qian Leizi bestowed upon Qianmo. Buzz. Once the talisman in the giant hand was activated, it immediately displayed an extraordinary might. Not only was everything within a radius of several hundred feet sealed, even the phoenix sword intent that the lightning water couldn't block was instantly solidified. The thousands of sword flashes were like fish swimming in ice, unable to escape no matter how hard they tried. They could only stay in the lightning water and wait for an opportunity to escape. Not to mention the light green flying sword that was about to strike Qianmo's forehead. This flying sword was indeed extremely powerful and was similar to the soul sword that Qin Jian wanted to use to kill Xiaohua before his death. It was a sword cultivator's secret technique that could directly kill one's soul. However, in the hands of the Yuanying, it was as obedient as a glass flying sword. With a slight clench of the large hand, the soul sword shattered and turned into specks of fireflies. As the Yuanying's hand stretched forward, the phoenix's sword intent that was sealed within the lightning water was also crushed and scattered in all directions. In an instant, it was broken. The nascent soul's hand continued to wave as it passed through the thunder and charged toward LV Ruochang. Looking at Yuan Zhengyu again, the 7-star heavenly lightning had barely managed to withstand the attack of the phoenix sword intent. At this moment, LV Ruochang had once again activated the sword intent. The sword beam that was much stronger than before easily broke through the defense of his lightning attraction technique and annihilated the 7 balls of lightning into nothingness. Yuan Zhengyu was helpless. He wanted to step on the Big Dipper again to attract the heavenly thunder. However, he was very clear that the heavenly thunder wouldn't work. His thunder summoning technique could only be considered as struggling at death's door. When he saw Qianmo take out his nascent soul hand, he sighed in his heart. This was probably the last life-saving technique of the golden core cultivators in the discussion hall. If this nascent soul hand was still useless, they could only die. Therefore, Yuan Zhongyu also stretched out his hand without hesitation. The nascent soul's hand was also activated. Similarly, a light green hand absorbed a large amount of heaven and earth's spiritual energy. Similarly, the sword beam was shattered by the rising power of the nascent soul's hand. The phoenix sword intent merely let out a mournful cry and was annihilated within the cracks of the heavenly thunder. Attack! Yuan Zhongyu did not hesitate. He activated his nascent soul's hand and Qian Mo's nascent soul's hand, and they both attacked LV Ruochang. In the short moment when the two nascent soul's hands were formed, Ji Hong's more than 70 light red skulls were also unable to withstand the phoenix sword intent. They only managed to swallow half of the sword beam. Another dozen skulls were destroyed by the sword beam. When the sword beam broke through the skull's defense, Ji Hong had no choice but to activate her nascent soul's hand as well. The third large hand swayed with a milky white brilliance. Like the other two large hands, it firmly imprisoned LV Ruochang in all directions. The three large hands grasped LV Ruochang from 3 different directions. It looked like she would be crushed into pieces in a few breaths' time. Humph! Unfortunately, when faced with the simultaneous attack of 3 nascent soul's hands, LV Ruochang was not as panicked as Qianmo and the others thought. Instead, she coldly snorted and raised both of her hands. She even slightly crossed her arms in front of her chest. Then, her palms were flat and faced upwards. More than 10 emerald green sword beams were born from her 10 fingers. Wong! A violent tremor spread out from LV Ruochang's body. More than 10 emerald green sword beams quickly circled around LV Ruochang, wrapping her up like a green cocoon. In just an instant, a whirlpool appeared above the light cocoon. That whirlpool was like a morning star, like a bright moon, emitting a faint white brilliance. This brilliance quickly washed down from the light cocoon. In the blink of an eye, the entire light cocoon was split into countless tiny fragments. Within the light cocoon, an inch-long emerald green flying sword flashed with a faint crystal light. It was extremely exquisite. As the small sword let out a thunderous roar, the air within the space sealed by the 3 nascent soul cultivators began to move. First, it was a strand of air, then a breeze, then a gust of wind, and then a gust of wind. In the end, the heaven and earth spiritual chi within a few miles had formed into a huge gust of wind that rushed into the emerald green flying sword. The hands of the 3 Yuanian cultivators, which were originally about to close, were now shaking a little. The seal within 100 feet was also gradually loosening. Qianmo, Yuan Zhongyu, and Ji Hong saw this and were shocked. Qianmo suddenly realized something and shouted, "Quick! Let's quickly circulate our magic power. This female swordsman is too cunning. She wants to use the huge amount of heaven and earth spiritual chi to resist the imprisonment of our nascent soul's hands. As long as she breaks through the imprisonment before the sword is formed, our initial opportunity will be snatched away by her again." Quick! After Yuan Zhongyu and Ji Hong heard this, they hurriedly circulated their magic power and poured it into the talismans. They used their divine sense to control the nascent soul's hands. This was their last resort to save their lives. Furthermore, they did not believe that the 3 nascent soul's hands could not kill a 3rd-grade illusory sword cultivator. Unfortunately, how could things go as they imagined? They saw the flying sword rapidly expand. In a moment, it became a slender flying sword that was more than 10 feet long. Not only was the flying sword abnormally green, it had a kind of soaring sword intent and an invincible sharpness that directly rushed towards the 3 nascent souls' hands. Buzz, buzz, buzz. At the same time that the sword intent soared into the sky, the flying swords that were scattered on the ground of Mo Qingdong Earth City and no longer controlled by any swordsman suddenly flew up from the ground. Each of them let out a trembling sword cry and rushed into the air, landing beside LV Ruochang's transformed flying sword. Even the flying swords in the hands of the swordsmen that were fighting against the 3 sects cultivators also let out an extreme buzzing sound. They were no longer controlled by the swordsmen and rushed into the air. Like the ownerless flying swords, they landed beside the huge flying sword. Many of the swordsmen did not panic when they lost their flying swords. Instead, they stood respectfully in the air. The sword light around their bodies flashed intensely as they bowed towards the sword to express the respect from the bottom of their hearts. The group of attacking Tao sect cultivators, under the situation where the spiritual chi of heaven and earth was completely disrupted, had various magical treasures. Although their bodies were filled with true essence and had not condensed their golden cores, they were far from being able to rely on the true essence contained within their golden cores to provide magic power. Thus, they could only withdraw their magical treasures and watch from afar. After all, the only things that could decide the outcome of the battle were the illusory swords and golden cores. Their usefulness was already negligible. Tens of thousands of flying swords rushed into the air and clustered around the huge emerald flying sword. That faint sword light overflowed from the flying sword and enveloped all of the flying swords. That kind of sharp, unstoppable aura became even more intense. At this moment, Qianemo and the other two's nascent soul hands were already grabbing towards the flying sword. The flying sword only paused in midair for a moment before it emitted a blinding brilliance. The entire sword vibrated and pierced towards the nascent soul hand that Qianemo was controlling. Following the flight of the illusory swords, the tens of thousands of flying swords that were enveloped by the sword light emitted an extremely ear-piercing sword hum and pierced towards the nascent soul hands of Yuan Zhongyu and Ji Hong. This is bad. Seeing how LV Ruochang used the illusory swords to absorb the heaven and earth spiritual chi to forcefully disperse the nascent soul hands, Qian Mo's heart turned cold. He knew that he had fallen into the trap of this sword cultivator. Following that, he saw how LV Ruochang actually used the illusory swords to control tens of thousands of flying swords. With tens of thousands of flying swords flying towards the three nascent soul hands, Qian Mo's heart sank to the bottom. Indeed, on top of the flying swords, a sword aura pierced through the sky and pierced through the air. The sharp whistling sound of the wind could be heard, and the nascent soul hands of Qianemo and the other two seemed to have been pierced by a needle. In the blink of an eye, the illusory swords had already pierced through the illusory swords and the nascent soul hands. Close. Qianemo did not dare to delay any longer. Once again, he circulated his spiritual energy, and the huge hands slowly closed together. At the same time, Ji Hong and Yuan Zhongyu also hurriedly chanted incantations. Two huge hands, one on the left and one on the right, slowly closed together. They wanted to grasp the tens of thousands of flying swords in their hands. Seeing the three huge hands closing together, the tens of thousands of flying swords were enveloped within. The cries of the swords and the resplendent sword light were all covered by the huge hands. The entire battlefield instantly quietened down, however. The silence only lasted for a moment. Following the tightening of the illusory sword's hands, tens of hundreds of swordsmen let out miserable cries. Their flying swords were destroyed by the illusory swords, and their primordial spirits were damaged. They could no longer stand still in midair and fell from the sky. Seeing this situation, the faces of the cultivators were filled with joy. There were even tens of young cultivators who were cheering noisily. After all, these three huge hands covered the space of hundreds of feet. The spiritual energy waves emitted from the palms were incomparably dense. With the cultivation of these cultivators, it was impossible for them to measure it. They also knew that this was the powerful technique of a golden core cultivator. In addition, the illusory swords of LV Ruochang and the tens of thousands of flying swords were all wrapped up by the palms. There was no visible movement. How could they not know that these flying swords were all caught by the illusory swords? Even Yuan Zhongyu and Ji Hong's faces revealed a relaxed expression. Once again, they formed seals in their hands. The illusory swords' hands moved slightly, as if they wanted to crush all the flying swords. -9. Chapter 2592. Fellow Taoists, don't be careless. Qian Mo's face did not relax as he cautiously reminded the two of them. At the same time, he once again channeled his mana in an attempt to shatter LV Ruochang's flying sword. At this moment, a needle-like ray of sword light shot out from the Yuanying's hand. Following that, from the opening, more rays of sword light appeared. Wang, after a moment of silence, a loud roar resounded, causing the Yuanying's hand in the center to shake violently. Not good. Qianmo's face suddenly lost all color. The Yuanying's hand seemed to be on the verge of collapse and was about to lose control. Just as Qianmo cried out in alarm, the Yuanying's hand instantly lost its connection with his mind. Rumble. A series of earth-shaking explosions resounded. The jade-green flying sword that was imprisoned by the Yuanying's hand rushed out. The entire Yuanying's hand collapsed, and a sky-piercing shockwave spread out. Not only the group of Foundation establishment cultivators, even Qianmo retreated in panic. Qianmo's Yuanying's hand exploded, and its aura dissipated. The other two Yuanying's hands on his left and right were also affected and shook violently. At this moment, LV Ruochang's flying sword suddenly swept across, and a ray of sword light flashed, slashing at the two Yuanying's hands. Shua from the two Yuanying's hands, a small ray of sword light shot out. This ray of sword light instantly expanded. Boom, 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 two consecutive loud sounds could be heard. Yuan Zhengyu's and Ji Hong's Yuanying's hands were similarly destroyed by LV Ruochang's 10,000 swords. On the entire battlefield, waves of air surged into the sky. The corpses of the fallen cultivators and swordsmen were torn apart by this explosive force. Broken limbs flew in all directions, and blood was also scattered in all directions along with the waves of air. See, Yuan Zhengyu and the rest's faces were slightly pale as they quickly retreated. At the same time, each of their magic treasures flew close to them to prevent LV Ruochang's sneak attack. When the three of them and the rest of the cultivators retreated a few hundred feet, they saw that in the midst of the mess in the air, the Yuanying's flying sword was much smaller than before. Around her, the 10,000 flying swords were also trembling slightly. It was obvious that LV Ruochang had paid a huge price to destroy the three Yuanying's hands. She also lost a lot of sword cultivators. Once the flying sword's Yuanying appeared, it once again and flew across the sky and pierced towards Qianmo. Behind the flying sword, thousands of flying Yuanyings. Once again, 10,000 flying swords. Yuan Zhengyu's and the Yuanying's S Yuanying's T Yuanying, S's, T to Yuanying. Both of them couldn't help but smile bitterly as they exchanged glances before looking at Qianmo. However, Qianmo's reaction was out of their expectations. Qianmo's eyes narrowed as he stared at the emerald green flying sword that was flying towards him. He actually appeared very calm. Could it be that Qianmo has a backup plan? Yuan Zhengyu and Ji Hong came to a realization at the same time. However, looking at the 10,000 flying swords, the two of them smiled bitterly. Not daring to wait for Qianmo's backup plan, they each used their own life-saving divine abilities. Ji Hong pointed her finger, and the 70 skeletons circling around her once again pounced over. Ji Hong spat out a mouthful of blood essence. Just like before, these skeletons were fighting for food. Following which, the skeletons glowed red and rushed into Ji Hong's body. At this point, Ji Hong no longer blocked them and allowed them to bite her body. Blood vessels appeared on her Taoist robe. Looking at Ji Hong again, her face was strangely flushed red. Following which, her face quickly turned pale. Her originally white hair turned white in an instant, and the wrinkles on her face deepened at a speed visible to the naked eye. In just a few breaths' time, the skeletons that were pouncing on Ji Hong's body were covered in crimson-red blood vessels. Compared to before, the skeletons had increased in size by quite a bit. The strangest thing was that their black hole-like eyes were actually glowing red. This red light faintly revealed a kind of viciousness. Go! Ji Hong's body shook and the golden light around her body flashed. The 70 skeletons let out a whimper as if they were unwilling to part with the fresh meat. They actually circled around Ji Hong's body. Go! Ji Hong had no choice but to berate them again. She pointed her finger, and an extremely faint light flashed and landed on all the skeletons. Those skeletons trembled slightly as if they were extremely afraid of this light and quickly rushed forward. At the same time, these skeletons were surrounded by traces of bloody light and quickly transformed into different faces. However, these faces were all ferocious. Pooh! More than 70 heads expanded and blocked in front of Ji-hong. Their 7 orifices each spat out a red and white light. This light was much stronger than the previous light curtain and was much finer. Yuan Zhengyu glanced at Ji-hong's technique and a trace of surprise flashed across his eyes. However, he did not dare to be negligent. He threw the flying sword in his hand and spat out a mouthful of essence blood. Roar, with a loud and clear sound. The flying sword also expanded and turned into the shape of a 3 feet long golden dragon. Its golden coat was flashing with lightning. Yuan Zhengyu seemed to have expended a lot of energy. His entire face was pale. However, the little golden dragon circled above his head, and the 7 thunderclouds in the sky pressed down. Flashes of lightning landed on the little golden dragon. At the same time, the golden dragon became brighter and brighter, and at the same time, it also protected Yuan Zhengyu under it. Looking at Qianmo, who was in the middle, he didn't seem to be panicking at all. He didn't seem to have taken out any special methods either. He merely pointed his finger, and the lightning bolt descended rapidly. Following Qianmo's incantation, the lightning bolt gradually expanded. The pentagram was like a huge spiritual beast, blocking in front of Qianmo. Qianmo couldn't have lost his mind, right? Ji-hong and Yuan Zhengyu, who had taken out their last life-saving technique, looked at Qianmo in disbelief. With such a method of usage, how could it block the attack of a third-grade illusory swordsman? However, LV Ruochang's 10,000 swords were already close at hand. How could they allow them to remind him? Go! Ji-hong pointed her finger, and the 70 heads let out a sinister laugh. The red and white lights became brighter and brighter and collided with the flying sword. Kachachav, countless lightning bolts condensed into a net, layer after layer. Yuan Zhengyu also hurriedly urged his treasure sword. The lightning bolts on the little golden dragon poured down in torrents, blocking the incoming flying sword. Withdraw, Qianmo, who bore the brunt of the attack, was even more direct. He urged the magic power in his body, and the lightning bolts in the sky also fell on the lightning flash. As the lightning flash swayed, the groove that was originally receiving the lightning bolts rushed straight towards LV Ruochang. A huge suction force was generated from the groove. A ray of sword light, like a meteor from outer space, pierced into the lightning flash without hesitation. When the huge lightning bolt struck the flying sword, it could only make the emerald green light of the flying sword become even brighter. Ka, a slight cracking sound was produced from the lightning flash. It was obvious that the lightning flash was not a match for LV Ruochang's attack. At this moment, Qianmo, who had a calm expression, became even more indifferent. He suddenly formed a strange incantation and raised his hand. Lightning flashed on his palm, and the lightning bolts that were falling on the lightning flash suddenly turned towards him. Kachacha, the lightning bolt hit Qianmo, but it did not injure him. Instead, it covered his entire body with lightning bolts. Not only that, Qianmo continued to form incantations. His whole body flew up into the sky. When he reached the top of the lightning flash, he pointed his finger. Shua, a clear sound was emitted from the lightning flash. The huge suction force rushed up to the sky. Not only did it cover the dark clouds in the sky, it also covered Qianmo. Daoist Yuan, Daoist Ji, farewell. Qianmo's indifferent voice sounded in the sky. This is already LV Ruochang's third attack. If I can break it, even if she is not seriously injured, you can still escape from her 10,000 swords. She will definitely not have a reason to chase after you. If I am seriously injured, I ask the two of you to lead the men of our 3 sects and kill these unarmed sword cultivators one by one. Daoist Qian. When Yuan Zhengyu and Ji-hong saw this, how could they not know what Qianmo wanted to do? Both of them were greatly moved. There is no need to stop me, and there is also no need to say anything. Qianmo's figure slowly descended into the lightning flash. Today, I am the center of the 3 sections. Naturally, I will protect the disciples of the 3 sects with my own body and kill the sword cultivators with my own body. Immediately, Qianmo's gaze turned to the south, which seemed to be the direction of the Imperial Thunder sect. He sighed in loneliness. Alas, I have long expected that I would end up like this. Indeed, who can understand my heart? My self-harm is undoubtedly because I have no face to see the old friends of the Sky Thunder Peak and the tens of thousands of disciples of the Imperial Thunder sect. But who can understand my heart? Admittedly, I want the Imperial Thunder sect to be strong, but my strength is weak. Admittedly, no one can understand my heart, but I have no regrets. Admittedly, everyone treats me as a laughing stock, but how can I not know? I have a clear conscience. Everything I do is based on my own understanding. I have my own path of strength. I regret that I can't see the Imperial Thunder sect standing at the peak of the country of Shi in my lifetime. Hi-hu. My path, let me walk, I alone. I have no regrets. I have no regrets. As he spoke, the lightning flashes cracked even more. Qianmo chanted, I have no regrets, and his body turned into lightning and fell into the lightning flashes. Fellow Taoist Qian, Yuan Zhongyu and Ji Hong both cried out in sorrow. At this moment, they didn't have the feeling of a fox grieving for a rabbit's death. Instead, they felt a deep sense of regret. They only thought of Qianmo as a stubborn person, a person who abided by the rules, or even a person who pretended to be a person of high morals. Who would have thought that this ordinary cultivator who was looked down upon and ridiculed by others actually had such ambition in his heart? Thinking of Qianmo's actions in the conference hall, thinking of his so-called collusion with Tu Hong, thinking of what he did to Dui Qiming and the others, and thinking of how he revealed Tu Hong's plans and thoughts in the conference hall, as well as how he was forced to be the center of the three paths, Qianmo did not hesitate to exchange his life for the tens of thousands of disciples. Yuan Zhongyu and Ji Hong deeply understood that they had underestimated Qianmo. They had underestimated Qianmo's personality. In Qianmo's heart, there was a Grand Duke. -9. Chapter 2593. Boom, 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 the lightning flashes suddenly exploded. Although the momentum was not as strong as the Yuanying's hand, this explosion was still caused by Qianmo's self-destruction of his physical body and his natal magical treasure. The target was very clear, and the area was also very concentrated. The space around a few dozen feet to the left shook violently, and the silent ripples pushed everyone back a few dozen feet. In the midst of this ripple, the 10,000 swords that were piercing towards Yuan Zhongyu and Ji Hong suddenly stopped and quietly stopped in midair. At the place where the splendor was, countless lightning bolts burst out. Following the lightning bolts, Lu Ruochang's figure appeared. His sword was damaged, his face was pale, and there was even a faint trace of fear in his eyes. It was obvious that under Qianmo's life-risking attack, Lu Ruochang was unable to maintain his sword form and was even seriously injured. Oomph! Lu Ruochang's cold voice sounded. This sword is a man of his words. The 3 moves that I said earlier have already passed. 2 of you are still alive. Since you all have dodged, this sword will spare your lives. You can go back later. Hearing the words of the 3rd-grade illusory swordsman, the cultivators of the 3 sects who were waiting nearby all had expressions of joy on their faces. This Lu Ruochang's sword form was really too powerful and had already scared everyone to death. Now that they saw a chance of survival, how could they not be happy? Even the golden core cultivator as strong as Ji Hong hurriedly waved her hand. In front of the 10,000 swords, the 70 or so heads flew back and raised their hands to give the order. But at this time, Yuan Zhongyu smiled faintly and said, "It seems that the 3 moves have not been completed yet? The move just now can only be considered as half of the 2nd move. This old man is not talented. I will take the 3rd move." What? Ji Hong was shocked. Although she still had magic power in her body, it had already been exhausted. How could she fight against a 3rd-grade illusory swordsman? However, when Ji Hong saw Yuan Zhongyu's calm expression and looked at the 10,000 flying swords floating quietly in front of her, a thoughtful expression appeared on her face. At the same time, she raised her eyebrows and coldly said, "That's right. Senior Qianmo used his life to help us dodge the 2nd move. We are already prepared to receive your 3rd move." Kill. Yuan Zhongyu didn't wait for Ji Hong to finish speaking. He raised his hand, and the sword that had transformed into a little golden dragon roared. The 7 dark clouds in the sky flashed with lightning and struck down at LV Ruochang. Seeing this, LV Ruochang's eyes flashed with a trace of shame and anger. Her body emitted an extremely weak sword light, and her figure could no longer support itself in the air. She fell for more than 10 meters. At the same time, the thousands of flying swords hanging around her fell together, just like fallen leaves swept by the autumn wind. Senior brother Qianemo has already injured this bastard. This was the perfect time to kill her. Everyone, for the heroic death of Qianemo, for the great victory of our Dao sect. Kill. Seeing this, Yuan Zhongyu knew that his guess was correct. Wherever the sword pointed, numerous lightning bolts struck down, hitting the place where LV Ruochang's body fell. LV Ruochang was almost unable to deal with the lightning bolts that were easily deflected. Her body swayed twice, and with lightning bolts lingering around her, she urged the flying swords under her feet to escape towards the northwest in an extremely sorry state. As for the remaining 10,000 swordsmen, seeing their flying swords falling from the sky, they hurriedly urged their sword energy to connect with their flying swords. However, many of the Dao sect cultivators were already moved by Qianmo's death without hesitation. Seeing that there was a chance to avenge him, they couldn't help but feel agitated. They urged their energy to their utmost, and the light from their magical treasures shot towards the unarmed swordsmen. The swordsmen were already at a disadvantage, and now they were in an even more sorry state. Those with high cultivation could still retrieve their flying swords and step on them, following closely behind LV Ruochang's departing figure. Those with low cultivation couldn't retrieve their flying swords in time, and could only urge their sword energy to fly out. However, their bodies were much slower, and the thousands of magical treasures of the cultivators had already been smashed to the ground. Another 60% of the swordsmen had fallen here. Kill! Yuan Zhongyu and Ji Hong shouted. They took the lead and flew up, ignoring the swordsmen. Each of them held a treasure in their hands and constantly channeled their magic power. They wanted to catch up with LV Ruochang and kill him on the spot. However, it was obvious that the flying techniques of the swordsmen were superior to those of the Dao sect cultivators, not to mention LV Ruochang, who was at the 3rd grade of the illusory sword. In the blink of an eye, she was already far away, and it seemed that with Yuan Zhongyu and Ji Hong's flying speed, it would be difficult to catch up with her. However, Yuan Zhongyu raised his eyebrows and cried out in joy, "Fellow Daoist Ji, look! Isn't LV Ruochang escaping towards the sword catacomb?" That's right, it's the sword catacomb. Ji Hong didn't understand Yuan Zhongyu's joy. If the swordsmen were defeated, wouldn't they be escaping towards the sword catacomb? Could it be that they have a better place to go? Ha ha ha, Yuan Zhongyu laughed and said, "Fellow Daoist Ji, there's something you don't know." Following which, Yuan Zhongyu repeated Qianmo's suggestion. It was as if her entire body was an azure flying sword. Even when the azure light inadvertently flowed out, the strange sword rune would appear from time to time. It was unclear whether it was inherent to the azure light or unintentionally formed. Little friend Zhang, Yu Qingtian didn't care about Zhang Yue's indifference. He only said kindly, "It's not that this old man is impatient. It's just that at this moment, outside the sword catacomb, the swordsmen of the Huan country and the cultivators of the 3 countries are fighting fiercely. I don't know how many lives have been lost here. If our cooperation can be completed earlier, wouldn't there be fewer cultivators and swordsmen dying?" Hee, when has Sect Master Yu been so benevolent? If Sect Master Yu is really benevolent, why don't you remove the restriction on this sword? As long as this sword appears in the sword catacomb, the warriors of my sword domain will know that this sword is still alive in this world. Then, the war between cultivators will naturally end. Why wait until our cooperation ends? As she spoke, Zhang Yuhe raised her arm. A few silver crystal threads appeared on her arm. The silver brilliance on the crystal threads shone brightly, covering Zhang Yue's arm and half of her waist. This old man naturally wants to let you go back earlier. Yu Qingtian didn't seem to feel embarrassed. He only smiled and said, "But our cooperation hasn't been completed yet. How can this old man let you go? If you go out and don't come back, wouldn't this old man's decades of hard work be in vain?" This sword can naturally make a sword oath that when the war is over, I will come back to the sword catacomb. Zhang Yuhe replied, the warriors of my sword domain have always been true to their words, unlike you cultivators of the Dao sect. -9. Chapter 2594. Ha ha ha. My young friend Zhang. Yu Qingtian laughed. In this world, if there is no betrayal and no betrayal, what is the use of the blood oath and the sword oath? However, how can the sword oath and the blood oath be compared to the control in your own hands? If you don't fulfill the sword oath and return to the sword tomb, and instead bring the sect master of your Xinjian sect to the sword tomb to look for me, what should I do? If I don't fulfill the sword oath, then how can sect master you help me cultivate the extreme Yin constitution? Help me cultivate the 6 directions in spirit through the blood sacrifice? A mysterious smile appeared on Zhang Yuhe's lips. Yu Qingtian raised his white eyebrows and said without hesitation, don't you want to cultivate the 6 directions in spirit yourself? Don't you want to break through the illusory sword realm and enter the sword transformation realm? In my opinion, even if I let you go now, I'm afraid you won't leave. Zhang Yuhe did not speak for a long time. After a long while, she sighed and said, yes. Entering the sword transformation realm is the lifelong pursuit of the swordsman of the sword region. The great yin-yang 6 directions sword spirit is another shortcut. In just a few decades, although this sword has not cultivated the great yin-yang 6 directions sword spirit, just by relying on this extreme yin constitution and the communication with the 6 directions yin spirit, my entire body can already transform into a simple sword. If I can cultivate the 6 directions yin spirit, I can immediately take a peek at the sword transformation realm. When the yin spirit and this sword become one, it will definitely stabilize the sword transformation realm. In the future, the spiritual sword and divine sword can definitely be expected. Even if sect master you wants me to leave now, I will definitely not leave. Yes, if you leave, won't your decades of hard work and pain be in vain? Yu Qingtian nodded and said, my decades of hard work will also be in vain. Yu Qingtian paused for a moment and said, in order to cultivate your extreme yin constitution, I used the power of the whole family to find the mysterious yin spirit grass and the great yang dragon root, as well as countless rare treasures. This old man has invested more than little friend. Humph, sect master you. Do you think I don't know about this? You don't have to say it again and again. Are you reminding me to be grateful? Zhang Yuhe sneered. If you don't have my incomplete sword slip, do you know what the spirit of the great yin-yang 6 directions sword is? Do you know how to cultivate a sword spirit? Furthermore, if this sword were to refine a 6 directions yin spirit, wouldn't your Yu family be able to refine a 6 directions yang spirit as well? Wasn't he able to cultivate a sword transformation disciple whose cultivation base was comparable to that of a nascent soul stage cultivator? Your Yu family's harvest seems to be much more than mine, right? Haha, that's right. Yu Qingtian did not wait for Zhang Yuhe to say anything and directly admitted. That's why I used the strength of my entire clan to cooperate with you, little friend. That's why you and I could work together for decades. However, Zhang Yuhe did not let it go and continued. Didn't the cultivation method of the great yin-yang 6 directions sword spirit also remain in the Yu family? In the future, when you meet a suitable disciple, you can even cultivate a swordsman. Isn't this my contribution? Isn't this my sincerity? Sect master, you actually imprisoned this sword here for dozens of years. Haha, little friend Zhang, it's pointless to talk about it now. Although Yu Qingtian's face was all smiles, his tone was somewhat cold. Little friend, your sword slip only has the technique to cultivate a sword spirit, but it doesn't have the method to change one's physique, right? This profound phoenix physique is a secret technique passed down in my Yu family. Even the top sects in the 3 kingdoms of cultivation may not have such a strange technique, let alone sword cultivators from your Huan kingdom, right? If it weren't for little friend's sincerity in cooperating with me, how could I take it out? Little friend, I've seen your cultivation advance by leaps and bounds all the way from the drawing sword stage to the 2nd grade of the illusory sword stage. This seems to be the result of my Yu family's secret technique, right? Not to mention, If it weren't for the disciples of my Yu family who discovered the formation when you fell into the sword tomb that day, I'm afraid you would have. That formation was your Yu family's trap? Don't think that this sword doesn't know. Zhang Yuhe said angrily. This sword admits that your body refining technique is indeed useful, but if you don't have the technique to communicate with the sword spirit, how can you improve your cultivation? Didn't an ordinary disciple of your Yu family cultivate from the qi refinement stage all the way to the late stage of the foundation establishment stage under this sword's secret technique? When the Liuhe Yang spirit is cultivated, he can also easily step into the gold core stage. Isn't this secret technique 100 times more useful than your profound phoenix technique? Yes, Yu Qingtian saw that Zhang Yuhe was angry and said with a smile, I admit all these. Otherwise, why would I continue to cooperate with little friend? However, I still have to say that the sword formation you fell into was definitely not set up by my Yu family. It was really a formation left behind by the sword tomb. Little friend returned to Huan Kingdom in a hurry that day and accidentally touched the restriction. Hearing Yu Qingtian's soft words and mentioning the restriction that day, Zhang Yue's cold expression was a little strange, and even her eyes flashed with melancholy. She sighed and said, Sect Master Yu, is there still no news of my sister Zhang Yutong? Of course there isn't. Yu Qingtian said without hesitation, when I was cooperating with you, I had already told you the news of the three kingdoms without hiding anything. As long as my Yu family knew the whereabouts of Duan Yuming and the others from the Xinjian sect, we would definitely not hide anything. If I knew the news of Zhang Yutong, I would definitely tell you immediately. I hope so. Zhang Yuhe said faintly, This sword is a little selfish. If it weren't for the cooperation with you, this sword would have already passed the news to my sect master. Haha, little friend, you don't have to worry about this. The cooperation between you and me is mutually beneficial. The news of Zhang Yutong won't affect our cooperation. Why wouldn't I tell you? Yu Qingtian comforted. Besides, your Xinjian sect must have received your previous message to send illusory swordsman to the three kingdoms to look for you. Otherwise, why would they go directly to Ming Kingdom? As for whether you go back or not, it's the same. Also, didn't I tell you clearly? Your message and your escape. It's very likely that those unknown cultivators did it on purpose. What they're after? Hee, it's not shallow. This old man was only guessing that day. Now that the Dao cultivators are fighting, this old man's guess should be confirmed. Then why did Lu Weigang start a war between cultivators? It doesn't mean anything to him. Zhang Yuhe sneered. He's just a foundation establishment cultivator. He's just an ant. It's still too early to talk about it. I think there must be a real conspiracy brewing after this war. Yu Qingtian seemed to be pointing something out. Zhang Yuhe was concerned and asked, How is the war between cultivators now? Is it my sword realm or your Taoist sect that has the upper hand? In order to show my sincerity, as long as you want to know, I won't hide any information from you. Don't you know the situation of the war? Yu Qingtian said with a smile. According to Sect Master Yu's battle report, my sword realm naturally has the upper hand. Zhang Yuhe frowned and said, But this is poles apart from my estimation. Little friend, you're not at the front of the battle. How do you know the changes in the situation? Yu Qingtian said disapprovingly, Now, the sword cultivators of Huan Kingdom have already passed the sword tomb and are about to advance to the vicinity of Sky Patrol City. If it weren't for Shui Yu Zhenren, I'm afraid they would have attacked Sky Patrol City. Isn't this the result that Sect Master Yu wants? Zhang Yuhe sneered. Hee, I'm really contradicting myself now. Yu Qingtian said with a smile, I'm a cultivator of the country of Shi. Naturally, I hope that my Taoist sect cultivators will win. However, our plan is carried out in the sword tomb. This war between cultivators is really fast, and it takes a lot of time for you to refine the sword spirit. If my Taoist sect defeats the sword cultivators, it's inevitable that we'll fight our way to the sword tomb. Although the sword tomb is huge and the chances of finding you and me are slim, Little Friend's Great Six Directions Yin-Yang Sword Spirit is completed. There must be some changes in the sky. It's impossible that it won't attract the attention of the sword cultivators and the Taoist sect cultivators. It's extremely disadvantageous for both you and me. Isn't this what sect master you wants? Zhang Yuhe sneered. This war is far away from the sword tomb. Even if there's chaos here, it has nothing to do with the war. Of course not. Yu Qingtian shook his head. I'm naturally concerned about the war. I've already said before that there's something strange about this war. It's very likely that something strange will happen soon. At this point, he frowned slightly. Then, he smiled and said, however, I'm only concerned about the war. This strange thing has nothing to do with you and my Yu family. When you've completed the great 6 directions in Yang Sword Spirit and stepped into the sword transformation realm, not only will it bring glory to the sect, but it will also be easy for you to avenge Zhang Yutong. That's right. Zhang Yuhe gritted her teeth. This is also my plan. I want to use the power of the sword transformation realm to kill Lu Weigang and the Foundation establishment cultivator behind him. Otherwise, no matter how sect master you threatened or tempted me that day, I will never agree to it. Yes, 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 Yu Qingtian smiled apologetically. I also hate cultivators who pretend to be obedient but secretly plot against me. That's why I'm helping you. No matter which sect you're from, as long as you leave the sword tomb as a sword transformation realm cultivator, which nascent soul cultivator in the 3 cultivation countries will dare to disrespect you? Avenging Zhang Yutong will be a piece of cake. Zhang Yuhe snorted coldly. Her eyes flashed with hatred. I just don't know. When will you start condensing the blood spirit for the 6th time? Yu Qingtian finally asked tentatively. Alas, sect master Yu, it's not that I'm not in a hurry. Zhang Yuhe sighed and waved her hand. A green brilliance condensed in front of her, and a flying sword more than a foot long appeared in the air. The flying sword flashed with sword light, and its shape was indistinct. The threatening sword intent actually caused Yu Qingtian's Taoist robe to flutter in the wind. He said, to be honest, I'm 100 times more anxious than you are. I don't know whether my twin sister is dead or alive, so I can only hide here and practice hard. I can't do anything for her. My heart is tormented every day, and I can't wait to condense the great 6 directions in Yang Sword Spirit now. Chapter 2595. Although the great Yin Yang 6 directions sword spirit is not difficult to cultivate, and 2 swordsmen with extreme Yin and extreme Yang constitutions can barely cultivate it with some secret techniques. However, if one really cultivates it to the point where it can move unhindered and cut off all Yin and Yang in the void, it will not be a simple matter. It can even be said to be impossible. Although my 10,000 spirits blood sacrifice technique cannot cultivate the great Yin Yang 6 directions sword spirit to the extreme, if it can really be cultivated, it will definitely not be difficult to kill a nascent soul cultivator. However, I've already told the sect master about the 10,000 spirit blood sacrifice. We'll select 99,999 Foundation establishment cultivators, and 20% of them will be disciples with pure 5 elements physiques. After that, we'll have to go through 6 60-year cycles of refinement before we succeed. Zhang Yuhe did not wait for Yu Qingtian to say anything and argued very eloquently, as if she was bargaining. That's impossible. Yu Qingtian shook his head. Not to mention that the harsh physiques of these 100,000 cultivators cannot be satisfied. Even 6 cycles of refinement is impossible. Yes, Zhang Yuhe said helplessly. Then we can only simplify it. We don't need those with 5 elements physiques, just cultivators will do. We don't need 6 cycles of refinement. We only need these few decades. But the blood spirits of those 99,999 cultivators, they absolutely couldn't be left out. Without enough blood spirits, the Yin Yang sword spirit will not be able to grow, and how can it form the 6 directions sword spirit? Little friend, Yu Qingtian smiled bitterly. In these few decades, I have already provided nearly 70,000 blood spirits, although the quality of the blood spirits varies, but at least there are some, right? How long do you think my Yu family can take the lives of so many cultivators? If any part of it is accidentally leaked, my Yu family will definitely not have the chance to establish itself in the Dawn Rain continent. The 3 kingdoms of cultivation. Won't those cultivation sects completely wipe out my Yu family? Hee hee, Zhang Yuhe smiled faintly again. Sect Master Yu, If you were not in the sword tomb that day, if you did something that triggered the blood spirits, how could I detect it? How could I be trapped in the sword formation? Moreover, you did not hesitate at all for the first blood sacrifice and arranged it in an extremely short period of time. Do you think I would not know? Hee. Yu Qingtian only chuckled and did not answer. Don't worry, Sect Master Yu. This sword will only speak of this matter in front of the Sect Master, and will absolutely not speak of it to a third person. This matter is also related to my safety. Zhang Yuhe waved her hand again, and the azure flying sword immediately jumped up and danced around her like a dragonfly. Now, this great yin-yang six-direction sword spirit has already undergone 5 blood sacrifices and is about to reach perfection. This last blood sacrifice is also very important. If it succeeds, this sword can immediately step into the 3rd grade of the illusory sword and see the sword transformation realm, and that disciple of yours can immediately step into the gold core realm. However, if there is even the slightest mistake, not only will this sword and your disciples' lives be in danger, but everything from before will also be for naught. This sword cannot afford to be careless. You don't need to remind me. Yu Qingtian nodded and said, this old man already knew, but after 5 blood sacrifices, this old man really can't gather so many blood spirits in the Dawn Rain continent. This time, I used up all the resources of the Yu family and spent nearly 5 years to barely find enough blood spirits. However, if this little friend still can't carry out the blood sacrifice, this old man is afraid that there will be a change in the situation. When that time comes, no one will answer you even if you beg the heavens and the earth. All right. Zhang Yuhe hesitated for a moment and finally nodded. Sect Master, give this sword another month. This sword will properly refine this 6 directions sword spirit. When it is slightly perfect, I will inform Sect Master. All right, Yu Qingtian heaved a sigh of relief and cupped his hands. This matter is beneficial to both of us. Little friend, I will have to trouble you to do it. Of course. Zhang Yuhe opened her mouth, and the azure flying sword suddenly entered it. The azure color of the entire silver ball of light brightened, and the gap slowly closed again. Zhang Yuhe raised her eyes to look at the ball of light that was entwined with crimson fire threads and said, your nephew's aptitude is indeed not bad, but it's a pity that his cultivation is still too shallow. When you urge this sword, don't forget to remind him. If his 6 directions yang spirit is not perfect, just relying on this sword to make up for it, and bring him into the gold core realm. I'm afraid that the entire great yin-yang 6 directions sword spirit will only have a 40% chance of success. This sword is unwilling to carry out the last blood sacrifice because of him. Yes, I will have to trouble you to worry about this matter. This disciple is also the most outstanding disciple of the Yu family. Although his cultivation is shallow, his physique is inclined towards extreme yang. Otherwise, this old man wouldn't dare to hand him over to you. Yu Qingtian nodded in agreement. Yes, Sect Master is right. If it weren't for his extreme yang physique, why would this sword be willing to cultivate the 6 directions yang spirit with him? Zhang Yuhe nodded proudly. As she spoke, the azure light around Zhang Yuhe surged out from her skin and wrapped around her entire head. It was very similar to an azure cocoon, but there were still traces of blood on this azure cocoon, just like the azure brilliance in the silver ball of light. Yu Qingtian's eyes revealed a thoughtful expression. He clapped his hands again and took out the tiger-shaped magic weapon, sealing the gap in the ball of light. After waiting for a moment, he pointed his finger again, and the magic weapon spat out a silver brilliance again. The brilliance was like a silver net that landed on the ball of light and quickly merged into it before disappearing. Then, Yu Qingtian waved the magic weapon and used the same incantation to open the silver ball of light that was suffused with crimson threads on the left. A crimson brilliance flashed in the silver gap, and streaks of seemingly scorching red rushed out of the gap, almost igniting the air. Great-grandfather! An equally crisp voice sounded, and a handsome young man flashed out from the gap. This young man was wearing a silver Taoist robe, and red light lingered around his body. Streaks of red light were like tiny pythons that flowed around the surface of the young man's body. Even when the young man spoke, Red light was swallowing and spitting out from his mouth and nose. However, just like Yu Qingtian, this young man's eyes were extremely close to silver and didn't change with the crimson brilliance around his body. Yu Qingtian smiled and said, "How's the sacrificial refining of the six directions yang spirit?" This young man was actually the Yu Tong that Xiao Hua had been thinking about for a long time. He was also the Yu Tong who had forced Xiao Hua out of the Huan Hua sect and was preparing to send Xiao Hua to his death in the Sword Tomb. However, at this time, Yu Tong's cultivation was already at the middle stage of the Foundation establishment realm, and it seemed that he wasn't much worse than Xiao Hua. Especially his handsome and youthful appearance, he had already surpassed Xiao Hua's. Hee, thank you for your concern, great-grandfather. Yu Tong bowed and said with a smile, "Everything is under the boy's control. There won't be any mistakes." Great-grandfather? Hee, all right then. A benevolent smile appeared on Yu Qingtian's face, and his divine sense swept across Yu Tong's body. That scorching feeling was transmitted to him along with his divine sense. Yu Qingtian didn't dare to examine carefully and hurriedly withdrew his divine sense and said, "Our Yu family originally wanted to borrow the massive amount of broken swords and the accumulated gold-attributed spiritual chi of heaven and earth to carry out the ritual of turning stone into gold, helping you and other disciples with suitable aptitudes to improve their physiques. But we didn't expect that we would actually meet Zhang Yuhe, a sword cultivator. This refining technique of the great six directions yin-yang sword spirit is not only useful to you, but also to the future generations of our Yu family, right?" Yu Tong pondered for a moment and nodded, saying, "Great-grandfather is right. This is a great opportunity for our Yu family of Fallen Gold Mountain, and also a contribution great-grandfather has made to our Yu family. This refining technique of the great six directions yin-yang sword spirit is indeed complete, and can be used as our Yu family's ancestral secret technique in the future." "Great. Now that you've said so, this old man is relieved." Yu Qingtian seemed to trust Yu Tong very much, and a trace of joy appeared on his face. However, Yu Tong changed the topic again, saying, "However, this great six directions yin-yang sword spirit is easy to refine, but if it's cultivated to the extreme like Zhang Yuhe, it's too dangerous and extravagant. Our Yu family can only take the risk once. It's not like turning stone into gold, which can be done once every few decades. If we do it too often, it'll be easily discovered by other cultivation sections. Not to mention other sects, even the washed flower sect, won't tolerate us. As for the reputation of the Yu family of Fallen Gold Mountain, there's no need to mention it again. Ha 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 ha. This old man will only do this once in his life. It's not my turn to worry about the future." Yu Qingtian laughed again. This old man will be able to face the ancestors of the Yu family in the underworld without feeling ashamed after doing this. As for the rest, this old man doesn't dare to think too much. Ha ha, great-grandfather is too modest. Yu Tong smiled faintly. Boy has succeeded in his cultivation. How can he forget everything great-grandfather has done? It's a pity that great-grandfather's physique is a little weak, and that Zhang Yuhe can't cooperate with great-grandfather. Otherwise, this great six directions yin-yang spirit would be great-grandfather's, and great-grandfather's nascent soul stage would be great-grandfather's. As he spoke, Yu Tong blew a breath like Zhang Yuhe. A red light flashed, and a small sword fell in midair. Yu Tong flicked his hand, and the small sword immediately turned into 64 flying swords, rushing out like a flame. The entire square outside the light ball was extremely hot. "Oh?" Yu Qingtian was slightly startled. He stretched out his hand, and a palm-sized shield flew out. Yu Qingtian grabbed his hand, and a silver-white brilliance flashed between his palms. The entire shield suddenly expanded and blocked the 64 flying swords. "Haha, great-grandfather is testing this boy." A smile appeared on Yu Tong's face, and an indescribable spell appeared in his hand. It was somewhat similar to a sword spell, but it was a little different. Buzz! The 64 flying swords roared at the same time, and sparks flew out from each of them. The 64 flying swords condensed into a ball of flame and rushed toward the shield. Puff! There was only a soft sound, and a silver light flashed on the shield. The flames disappeared, and the shield was as if it was nothing. A hole a few feet in size appeared on the shield. Ah, it's really so powerful? Yu Qingtian almost couldn't believe his eyes. He stared straight at the small sword that had turned into a scarlet-red, invisible sword. He was really a little envious. -9. Chapter 2596. All right, I'll let you know. Yutong didn't look pleased at all. He explained, the so-called Great Yin-Yang Six Directions Sword Spirit is a sword spirit born from the blood of 100,000 living beings. This sword spirit already has intelligence. Against great-grandfather's Dharma artifact, this sword spirit was able to find the weakness of the Dharma artifact's Dharma array in a short period of time. It also found the weakness of the Dharma artifact's material to attack. This sword spirit is originally an object of extreme yang. Against a magic weapon, won't it be killed in one hit? Of course, at this moment, the Six Directions Yang spirit has yet to truly merge with it. This flying sword is only tainted with some of the spiritual intelligence of the Six Directions Yang spirit. If it's a flying sword that's truly merged with the Six Directions Yang spirit, then it's truly powerful. This sword spirit has yet to truly merge with the sword spirit, but it's already so powerful? Yu Qingtian was really shocked. Then, he realized, isn't this the spiritual weapon of our Taoist sect? That's right. You can say that. Yu Tong nodded and said, it's precisely because of the 100,000 blood sacrifice that such a sword spirit was born. This is a sword spirit that truly has spiritual intelligence. Sword cultivation is far from as simple as we Taoist cultivators think. With a spiritual weapon as the body and a sword spirit and primordial spirit as the spirit, I'm afraid it's really comparable to a soul formation cultivator. Yu Qingtian nodded. If you hadn't obtained this opportunity and cultivated the yin-yang sword spirit with Zhang Yuhe, I'm afraid our Taoist sect wouldn't have known the mystery behind it in the end. After all, I'm cultivating the sword with Taoism. Compared to Zhang Yuhe, I'm still lacking in understanding. She didn't hide anything when she cultivated the sword spirit, but I still can't suppress her in terms of sword spirit. Yu Tong reminded, great-grandfather, you have to be careful of her hidden tricks. Yu Qingtian furrowed his brows. She doesn't dare to hide it now because of the sword oath she made earlier. Furthermore, the Six Directions Yang spirit that you nurtured has to complement her Six Directions Yin spirit. If your sword spirit is far inferior to hers, how can she cultivate her Yin spirit to perfection? Naturally, you don't have to worry too much about this. However, with your ability, can't you detect her hidden tricks? How can I detect them? This Zhang Yuhe isn't someone easy to deal with. Yu Tong narrowed his eyes and said coldly, she passed through the sword tomb to report back to the Xinjian sect. At that time, her twin sister Zhang Yutong's life was in danger. Although my Yu family did something to turn stone into gold in the sword tomb, that trace of blood spirit qi and sword qi was not too obvious, but she was able to sense it. Moreover, if they were ordinary people who cared about the safety of their loved ones, why would they take the risk of going to the sword tomb to investigate? They would hide far away and return to the Xian sword sect to report the news. Only after receiving news of the safety of their loved ones would they come back to check. She, on the other hand, barged in directly and landed in the remnant formation of the sword mound. Why would she care about Zhang Yutong's life? Yes, this old man thinks so too. If not for the fact that she wanted to refine the great yin-yang Six Directions sword spirit herself, how could she have fallen into the formation? Yu Qingtian nodded. But she has already discovered my Yu family's plan. So how can this old man let her go? This time, my Yu family was forced to imprison her, and she can be considered as one of the initiators of the war between Tao cultivators. If this matter is known by immortal Jing Huan and Fairy, by Hua of the Rinsing Flower sect, the future of my falling gold mountain will be bleak. Hee, why would the two seniors of the Rinsing Flower sect worry about such a trivial matter? The other seniors in charge of the actual situation only need to know what to do. Yu Tong said with a smile. Hee, that's the best. This old man doesn't need to worry about anything in the future. Yu Qingtian said with a smile. However, you don't need to worry too much about Zhang Yuhe. This old man has already taken precautions before cooperating with her, so I'm not afraid that she can escape from my grasp. Great-grandfather's calculation is the most powerful. Otherwise, my falling gold mountain wouldn't be so powerful. If I establish a sect in the future, you will be the one who will contribute the most. Yutong said with a smile. Yu Qingtian hurriedly waved his hand. What this old man has done is nothing. Oh. At this moment, a strange look appeared on Yutong's face, and he asked curiously, Great-grandfather, did you seal Zhang Yue's sword spirit well? Of course. Yu Qingtian was shocked and hurriedly said, every time I see her, I have to activate Jade Tiger's restriction to prevent her from understanding the movements within the Brahma Gold magic formation. Why? Could it be that you've sensed something? Yutong's gaze fell on the connection between the two light masses. There were two extremely thin crystal threads, one red and the other green, intertwined with each other, appearing and disappearing from time to time. Yutong pointed at the crystal threads and said thoughtfully, but Jade Tiger's restriction is still not enough. This crystal thread, I'm afraid it can allow her to sense some movements within the magic formation. That makes sense. Yu Qingtian looked at the crystal threads, which were like tentacles of the light masses. They trembled slightly as if they were breathing. You'd better practice your sword spirit. This old man won't disturb you. Yes, this boy knows. Yutong opened his mouth, and the crimson sword light fell into his mouth with a whoosh. Then, the red light around him lingered, and the cracks on the light masses gradually merged. There was no need for Yu Qingtian to activate them with Jade Tiger. When the silver light masses closed, the crimson brilliance danced on the light masses like the trajectory of stars. Yu Qingtian's gaze fell on the two faintly discernible crystal threads. He narrowed his eyes and looked at them for a long time. In the end, he did not dare to make any strange movements. With a wave of his sleeve, he sat cross-legged in front of the light masses and entered a meditative state. Time passed extremely quickly, and the situation of the entire battlefield had taken a shocking turn. It was far beyond Yu Qingtian and Zhang Yue's expectations. Not only were the sword cultivators unable to attack Sky Patrol City, but most of the sword cultivators who invaded the kingdom of Shi were defeated by the Taoist sect's cultivators. The sword cultivators who were guarding the spirit stone veins and big cities like Clear Cave all fled in panic. Even if a small number of swordsmen managed to block the cultivators' frenzied attacks, when they received various unfavorable news of their defeat, they could not hold on any longer. They retreated as they fought, and were defeated in the direction of the sword catacomb. The Golden Core cultivators in the meeting hall did not have any disciples patrolling the vicinity of the sword catacomb. They did not notice the decrease in the number of sword cultivator disciples, so they did not know the change in the sword cultivator disciple strategy. Even the sword cultivator disciples themselves did not know where some of the swordsmen had gone. Just like the Taoist sect's cultivators, they did not know that Black Sky Sect's Xiong Huasong had already set up the 10 Forces Annihilation formation in the sword catacomb, according to Tu Hong's idea and Qian Mo's suggestion. Of course, after many of the Golden Core cultivators in the meeting hall exchanged messages with each other, they learned that the swordsmen had been defeated. They were proud of themselves, but at the same time, they became suspicious. After all, the sword cultivators had invaded the kingdom of Shi and the kingdom of Huan for a long time. How could they be defeated so easily? Hence, while they were chasing after the sword cultivators, they once again sent messages to discuss. At this time, the various sects that were guarding the meeting hall could no longer hide the truth. They secretly revealed the arrangement of the magic formation that they had set up in the sword catacomb. Of course, this disclosure was also selective. Within a very small range, not all of the Golden Core cultivators in the meeting hall knew about it. However, all of the Golden Core cultivators who knew the truth were simply overjoyed. Although they felt a little bitter in their hearts, they felt that these fellow cultivators in the meeting hall did not discuss it with them. This was obviously looking down on them, but at the same time, they understood that this matter was not suitable for others to know. Moreover, this arrangement was really unimaginable. If everyone knew about it, how could it be considered a secret? Hence, the Golden Core cultivators did not suspect anything. Even if the swordsmen had set up some arrangements in the sword catacomb, They had already set up the magic formation. How could they not pursue and kill? Furthermore, according to the battle reports from various places, other than the swordsmen near the sword catacomb in the kingdom of Shi, the swordsmen in the kingdom of Lian were also defeated. Those swordsmen who were further away from the sword catacomb were even more miserable. They retreated into the kingdom of Huan in a panic, trying to escape the pursuit of the Taoist sect cultivators through the snow region's forbidden area near the border between the two countries. Some of the swordsmen who were fleeing to the sword catacomb had no choice but to give up the sword catacomb, which was a safer place, when they saw that there were too many cultivators chasing after them. They also plunged into the snow region's forbidden area in an attempt to escape. Moreover, many of the Golden Core cultivators in the meeting hall, other than Qianmo who had attacked the clear cave and died by self-explosion, Yuan Yiguang of the Blue Li sect, Qing Jiao of the Imosang Mountain, Zhou Qingping of the Thousand Leaf Ridge, Su Zhiqi of the Chenfan Valley, Huang Feng of the Strange Beast sect, and Zhu Junwei of the Cool Breeze Valley were all seriously injured and almost died. Yes, their opponents were indeed too strong. They were all second-grade and third-grade illusory sword cultivators, while they were only early-stage Golden Core cultivators. After activating the life-saving talismans given by their sects, they either killed their opponents and were seriously injured by the other swordsmen due to their lack of magic power, or they could not use the talismans to kill their opponents and were instead seriously injured by the backlash of the magic power required by the talismans. Of course, these Golden Core cultivators in the meeting hall were lucky to have the life-saving talismans given by their sections. What about the other Golden Core cultivators? In addition to these Golden Core cultivators in the meeting hall, there were also many Golden Core cultivators who had fallen in this battle, not to mention those Foundation Establishment and Qi Refining cultivators. Looking at the illusory swordsmen of the sword cultivators, many of them were also killed in this battle. The number was definitely not less than the number of Dao sect cultivators. The battle between the two sides was tragic, and it was definitely the most tragic battle since the start of the war. From this, it also showed what LV Ruochang, the sword cultivator, had said when setting up the plan that these ordinary battles could not eliminate the Golden Core cultivators in the meeting hall. This was because the life-saving talismans given by their sects were really powerful. An early-stage Golden Core cultivator who activated the talisman could fight against a third-grade illusory sword cultivator. Of course, if Jihong had wanted to escape at that time, she would have used the Yuanying hand to escape and LV Ruochang would not have been able to do anything. The special thing was that the Yuanying hand talismans were like other talismans and could be used multiple times. Therefore, if the sword cultivators wanted to kill the Golden Core cultivators in the meeting hall outside the sword tomb, they would have to exhaust a lot of swordsmen and engage in many battles. This was what the sword cultivators, who were at a disadvantage in numbers, did not want to see. This also contributed to LV Ruochang setting up a sword array in the sword tomb and preparing to kill the Golden Core cultivators in the meeting hall. Chapter 2597. The Jindan cultivators in the discussion hall did not think as far as LV Ruochang. From the various signs, it was clear that the sword cultivators were truly defeated, and it was not a trap like some of the Jindan cultivators were worried about. As such, every single Jindan cultivator in the discussion hall gathered their strength and urged their disciples to chase after the sword cultivators. They wanted to end this battle with the sword cultivators in the sword tomb. In addition, after the surviving Jindan cultivators in the discussion hall heard about Qian Mo's self-destruction, they also felt a sense of sorrow in their hearts. Actually, Qian Mo, Yuan Zhongyu, and Ji Hong could have escaped that day. However, Qian Mo chose this path himself. It was a path of no return. How could they not sigh? These Jindan cultivators were all heavenly geniuses, and all of them had ambitions in their hearts. However, they were currently in a dangerous situation, and it was as though they were treading on thin ice. If they were not careful, they could lose their lives at any moment. Not to mention their ambitions, their dreams were all about to turn into smoke. As such, the words that Qian Mo said before his death were deeply acknowledged by them. The confusion, ridicule, and mockery towards Qian Mo had all disappeared, and a trace of faintly discernible respect was born in their hearts. That's right. Who could clearly differentiate whether a person was good or bad? How could a person be determined by a single word or sentence? The bad that Xiaohua thought was not bad. The good that De Sun thought was not good. The bad that Daoist Shui you thought was not bad. The good that everyone worshipped might not be good either. Perhaps there was no such thing as good or bad in a human. No one would be able to differentiate between good and bad. Speaking of which, the Yu family of fallen Gold Mountain, who was hiding in the sword tomb, did not know that the sword cultivators were defeated. As they approached the sword tomb, the hundreds of thousands of Dao sect cultivators also chased after them. Xiao Hua, who was hiding in the small house, naturally did not know either. He was currently like the tens of thousands of cultivators, wholeheartedly comprehending the so-called secret technique of the Yu family and researching how to combine this secret technique with the sword arts of the sword cultivators. However, the difference was that while the tens of thousands of cultivators were dreaming of turning stone into gold, Xiao Hua had already treated this dream as a golden millet. On this day, a male cultivator who was not very tall quietly entered the sword tomb. This male cultivator's face was flat, and his nose, mouth, and other things were stuck to his face. Moreover, his eyes were not of a normal size, and there were several large tumors on his forehead. In particular, there were a few clumps of black hair growing on the tumor. It looked really indecent. This male cultivator was at the early stage of foundation establishment. His movements were vigorous, and he was also proficient in the art of flight. With a jade slip in his hand, he easily bypassed the formations and sword formations within the sword mound, arriving at the Zigue where Xiao Hua had met Yuping that day. However, the male cultivator threw the jade slip into Zigue with great familiarity. The stone touch token flashed inside Zigue and disappeared like a meteor. The male cultivator let out a sigh of relief and looked around. There was a hint of worry on his face. Not long after, Yuping flew over with a smile on her face and said from afar, "Yudong, you're finally back. Greetings, greetings, sixth uncle." This early foundation establishment cultivator was actually Yudong. It's that Yudong who recommended Xiao Hua. Moreover, this Yudong was actually a rare stutterer among cultivators. Yuping was probably already used to Yudong's stuttering. Seeing that he had already finished bowing and hadn't finished his respectful words, Yuping nodded and said, "Get up. We haven't seen each other for several years. Your cultivation seems to have made some progress." It's at Nanping. Nanping Mountain, there's some. At this point, he actually couldn't continue, as if something was stuck in his throat. "That's right. This is your opportunity." Yuping didn't pay attention and said with a smile, "The heavens are the fairest. Seeing that you're bitterly cultivating, they gave you an opportunity. You must properly grasp it." "Yes," Yudong said this word very smoothly, as if he was already used to saying it. "Let's go." Yuping waved his hand and flew up, saying, "This Zigue is new and you're not familiar with it. Follow this old man back to Fanjin Palace and find a quiet room to cultivate. Don't disappoint the heavens." Yes, nephew understands." Hearing this, Yudong's heart was filled with gratitude, and he couldn't help but stutter again. Seeing the flush on Yudong's face and the joy in his eyes, Yuping's gaze was also kind, and even a little bit tender. The corner of his mouth curled up into a smile, and he said while flying, "The day after tomorrow will be the last batch of cultivators to enter the palace for the Midas touch. These past few years, you haven't completed the sect master's task." This old man has also mentioned this to Senior Yubing several times. He also knows about your difficulties, so he didn't rush you, and even covered it up for you in front of the sect master. However, the recommendation of cultivators is an absolute order from the sect master. No matter who it is, they have to recommend a few foundation establishment cultivators. Yes, nephew. Nephew is ashamed. Yudong's face flushed red, and his eyes flashed with panic. Sect masters, punishment. Yuping naturally wouldn't wait for Yudong to finish speaking, and he smiled. "However, you were able to recommend an early foundation establishment cultivator at the most critical moment, and it seems that his aptitude is also very good. This old man has already told Senior Yubing that you've completed the sect master's task. When you return to Fanjin Palace, you must first pay a visit to Senior Yubing and thank him for his grace." Only then can you calm down. No, 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 no. Yudong had already said no more than 10 times behind Yuping, but Yuping didn't care. He continued to fly as he spoke. Moreover, he was flying slightly faster. When Yudong used all his strength to fly behind Yuping, he grabbed Yuping's Taoist robe. Yudong couldn't say no. What's wrong? Yuping smiled. Although you've only recommended one person, but with your eloquence, it's really rare. This person is equivalent to 10 of them. No, no. Yudong was really anxious, and his face was almost covered in sweat, and the veins on his forehead were popping out. Seeing that Yuping was also at a loss, Yudong hurriedly took out a jade slip and immersed his spiritual sense in it and quickly handed it to Yuping. Yuping frowned as he received it, and when he finished reading it, he was shocked. What? You didn't recommend a cultivator at all? Yes. Yudong was very familiar with this word. But if you didn't recommend him, then who recommended Fengying from the Huanhua sect? Yuping was a little flustered, and he asked anxiously. Yudong shook his head vigorously, indicating that he didn't know Fengying at all. But he used your stone striking token. It was your earliest stone striking token. Yuping still didn't give up and said anxiously, among the disciples of the Yu family of Fallen Gold Mountain, only you haven't returned for many years, and only you have the route of the stone striking token. Yudong didn't say much, and with a clap of his hands, he took out a jade slip and handed it to Yuping. Yuping's spiritual sense entered it, and his face was really ashen. This is your stone striking token. It's really the one you didn't use for a long time. But that day, senior brother Yuping, why did you say it was your stone striking token? Yuping was also stunned. The Yu family of Fallen Gold Mountain knew that the blood sacrifice they had performed in the Sword Tomb was a matter that angered both men and gods, so how would they dare to let others know? In these few decades, 100,000 cultivators had died in the Sword Tomb for no reason, and it was more serious than the great battle of Dao cultivators, so how could it not attract the attention of others? However, among these 100,000 cultivators, most of them were cultivators below the Qi refinement stage, and the majority were itinerant cultivators. Therefore, although the great battle of Dao cultivators had attracted the attention of some forces, after the battle began, everyone's attention was on the battle, and this matter was forgotten. However, if people really found out about the Yu family's plan, then Yuping also knew that this would be the beginning of the Yu family's destruction, even if Yu Qingtian didn't say so. Thinking of this, and looking at Yudong who was so anxious that his forehead was sweating, Yuping was also trembling in midair. What should I do? Yuping's mind was in a fierce struggle. Needless to say, this was definitely a mistake made by Yuping. As for where the mistake was made, Yuping wasn't clear, and it was too late to find out what the mistake was. Yuping could naturally push this matter to Yuping. However, who was Yuping? He was Yuping's senior brother who was very close to him. Yuping was able to mingle in the Yu family to this extent because of Yuping's care. If it was Yuhua's mistake, Yuping would have jumped up long ago, and there would be no need for him to think about it. However, Yuping couldn't do it, and Yuping couldn't expose it. Moreover, although it was Yuping's order to bring Xiao Hua into the Brahma Gold Palace, Yuping didn't carefully inspect Xiao Hua's token. Moreover, when he entered the palace, he even quarreled with the disciple who was inspecting him. Of course, even if Xiao Hua's token wasn't wrong, and even if Yuping didn't think that Xiao Hua didn't have the token of the Cleansing Flower sect, he was the one who brought Xiao Hua in, and no matter how he tried to clear himself of this responsibility, it was impossible. However, in just a short moment, Yuping calmed down, and a confident smile appeared on his face. 6666. Seeing Yuping's panic disappear, and a smile appeared on his face, Yudong was stunned, and he hurriedly pulled on Yuping's robe to ask. However, the more anxious he became, the more he stuttered, and he actually said 4 times in a row, but he was still unable to say uncle. Donger, don't be anxious. Yuping naturally knew what Yudong was thinking, and he patted Yudong's shoulder with a smile. This matter has nothing to do with you. It is this old man's negligence. No, this word was resolute, and Yudong took out a blank jade letter, wrote something on it, and passed it to Yuping. After Yuping saw it, A smile appeared on his face, and he said, "This child. What did you say about going to the sect head to admit your mistake? You even want to ask for this old man's forgiveness. What's the point of bringing up such a matter? As long as you have such intentions, this old man will be satisfied, and this old man will not have taken care of you in vain." -9. Chapter 2598. Immediately, Yuping pulled Yudong and said as they flew, "Actually, the situation is not as serious as you think. The Huanhua sect's foundation establishment disciple called Feng Ying has been arranged by this old man to stay in the cultivation nest. You also know that the cultivation nest is the most important place in the Brahma Golden Palace. It is completely controlled by the sect leader's Silver Tiger. Without a cultivation level above the Golden Core stage and special abilities, it is impossible to escape from there." Yes. Although Yudong stuttered, how could a foundation establishment cultivator be so stupid? Yuping only needed to point it out, and he understood. The panic on his face lessened, and he answered with a single word. "No matter what mission Feng Ying came here for. Since he is here, he can forget about going back. In the past, our Brahma Golden Palace has had disciples from the Huanhua sect. Since they can recommend him, why can't we?" Yuping gritted his teeth and said, "Moreover, when Feng Ying entered the cultivation nest, the sect leader also knew. This old man said that he was recommended by you, and he did not say anything. You don't have to say anything now." "Yes." Yu Dong nodded. "You must be sure today that no matter who comes to ask you, this Feng Ying was recommended by you. As for how you met him and how you recommended him, only you know. If you want to say it, say it. If you don't want to say it, no one will force you. This old man can be sure that no one will ask." Yuping said, "Even if there is a mistake in the end and the sect leader wants to take responsibility, you must insist that you were tricked by Feng Ying. He deliberately deceived you, and you also intended to fulfill the sect leader's orders. You hit it off. No one is wrong." "Yes." Yu Dong nodded. "Well, now that you have completed your mission, you still have to do as this old man said and pay your respects to Martial Uncle Yu Bing. If anything happens in the future, he will help you." Seeing that Yu Dong was very obedient, Yu Ping was relieved and smiled as he flew towards the Brahma Golden Palace. But after flying for a while, Yu Ping stretched out his hand and said, "Dong, give me your original stone mastery token." "Yes." Yu Dong reached out his hand and took out the stone tablet token that Yu Ping had just returned to him. Yu Ping took it and opened his mouth. A silver flying sword flew out and hit the jade talisman, shattering it into pieces. Then, with a twist of his hand, a silver-white light flashed and the jade talisman turned into powder. Yu Ping waved his hand and all the fragments floated into the air, landing on the sparse scarlet plants on the ground. With a few gusts of wind, they disappeared without a trace. "Let's go." Yu Ping finally felt relieved. He waved his hand and flew away. Yu Dong blinked his eyes and opened his mouth, but not a single word came out. He was still thinking about how he should answer if no one asked him about it, or how he should make this lie perfect. Just like what Yu Ping thought, no one asked Yu Dong. Even if there were dozens of Yu family disciples who met Yu Dong, they would only nod with a smile or leave without even looking at him. They knew that the only reply they would receive was a single word from Yu Dong. Seeing such a situation, while Yu Ping appeared calm on the surface, his anxious heart finally calmed down. Even a foundational cultivator who had done something wrong would feel uneasy in his heart. "Go. Senior Uncle Yu Bing is in his quiet room. Go and pay your respects." After walking to the plaza, Yu Ping pointed at another door and instructed Yu Dong. "Yes." Yu Dong did not say anything else, nodding his head and walking towards the door. Yu Ping hesitated for a moment before walking towards the room where Xiao Hua was imprisoned. Looking at the room from afar, which was no different from the other rooms, a trace of ruthlessness flashed past Yu Ping's eyes. He did not even dare to approach it, glancing at it a few times before leaving. The pitiful Xiao Hua was still paying attention to the door, waiting for someone to check on him before using his concealment technique. Or perhaps he could use his concealment talisman to escape without anyone noticing. Who would have thought that even if the other party discovered him, they would not disturb him at all, directly making him into a blood sacrifice. Who was the one who thought he was smart enough to walk right into the trap? Yuping had only just turned into a passageway when a late-stage Foundation establishment old man hurriedly walked over. It was precisely that old man Yubing that Xiaohua had seen at Wu Jiazigi's place. "Io, senior brother Yubing." Yuping saw him from afar and hurriedly said, "Dong is back." The moment he entered the palace, he immediately went to pay his respects to you. "Did you see him?" It is rare for Dong to still remember this old man. Seeing that it was Yuping, Yubing nodded his head slightly. However, his footsteps did not stop as he said, "This old man saw him just now." However, this old man had an important matter to attend to and did not listen to him speak in detail. Seeing that his cultivation has made some progress, he did not waste the past few years of training outside. Yes, Yuping smiled apologetically. "This is all due to senior brother's care. If this old man does not take care of you all, who else can I take care of?" Yubing laughed. "You all are not old Hua." At this point, a sharp tiger's roar could be heard in the air, resounding throughout the entire Brahma Gold Palace. "Enough! This old man will not talk to you anymore. Quickly return to the quiet room. The last time is about to begin. Let's see if you all have any opportunities." Yubing waved his hand, stopping Yuping from following him as he instructed. "I have already told Dong to hurry back to the quiet room. This child is really lucky to have returned today." Yes, this little brother understands." Yuping's heart trembled as he hurriedly stopped in his tracks. Looking at Yubing's back, he turned back to look at Xiaohua's small room before turning to another place. In just a moment, there were still many disciples of the Yu family walking back and forth in the square, but now there was no one to be seen. Above the square, above the silver sky, Yu Qingtian had already stood up with a trace of excitement on his face. Holding the silver tiger-shaped magic tool in his hand, he looked at the two silver balls of light in front of him with bright eyes. At this time, the silver balls of light were already hundreds of feet in size. Above the two balls of light, one crimson and one azure, were boiling like boiling water. From time to time, the crimson and azure splendor would splash out from the balls of light, and countless tiny flames and tiny ice shards would fall from the sky. Even when the crimson brilliance collided with the azure brilliance, there were even rumbling sounds of explosions. Previously, there was only a part of the crimson and azure light, but now, more than half of the balls of light were filled by the crimson and azure light. The previous silver splendor was now more like a shell or a binding, completely restricting the crimson and azure light under the silver balls of light. As for the two azure and red crystal threads that were previously connected between the two balls of light, they were now as thick as a strand of hair, firmly holding the two balls of light together. The azure and red colors would overflow from time to time in the crystal threads. However, although the two crystal threads were entangled together like before, at this time, they were not as simple as a thin thread, but were entangled together in an extremely complicated manner, as if they were connected into a string of sword talismans. The sword talismans flickered under the crimson and azure splendor, as if they were about to break free from the crystal threads. The entire space above the cloud curtain, which was several times larger than the square, was filled with the aura of extreme yang and extreme yin. The entire space became unstable. Naturally, Yu Qingtian could not get close to the two silver balls of light. He was pushed far away by the extreme yang and extreme yin, more than 500 feet away. Although Yu Qingtian was holding the silver tiger firmly in his hand, his eyes were still staring at the noisy azure light ball. This azure light had been growing from a sliver of the silver light to nearly half of it now. It had been more than 10 years, and he had watched the growth of the six directions in spirit bit by bit. At this critical moment, even with his cultivation of the beginner gold core stage, he could not help but feel his heart in his throat. Unexpectedly, the azure splendor had been boiling for more than 3 days, and the azure light had increased by more than 30%, but there was still no special movement on the ball of light. Yu Qingtian looked at the crimson ball of light next to him. Although the crimson color of the ball of light was slowly growing along with the crimson crystal threads on the two balls of light, it was not growing as fast as the azure light ball. Now, it had only grown by more than 10%. Yu Qingtian seemed to be deep in thought. The silver tiger in his hand swayed slightly, and a few faintly discernible rays of silver light fell from the surrounding space. Coincidentally, they covered the azure ball of light. For a moment, the silver light on the ball of light shone brightly, binding the azure splendor. Then, as if they were complementing each other, the crimson splendor intensified its agitation and accelerated its growth. After another day, there was a clear sound like a thunderclap, and the two balls of light suddenly stagnated. All the crimson, azure, and silver light stopped abruptly, and even the splendor that had just splashed out strangely stopped in midair. Yu Qingtian frowned, and the silver tiger in his hand shook slightly again, as if it was about to move. Unfortunately, before he could activate his spiritual power, a buzzing sound like a tiger's roar was emitted from the two balls of light at the same time. The crimson and azure lights of the two balls of light moved strangely again. However, this time, they were not boiling, but were rotating in the silver balls of light. As they rotated, countless sword talismans appeared on the balls of light. After each sword talisman appeared, a ray of sword light rushed into the air, and the sword talismans sank into the balls of light. Of course, these sword talismans did not appear randomly, but appeared on the two balls of light at the same time. However, one was crimson, and the other was azure. With the appearance of these sword talismans, the crimson and azure lights gradually separated from the silver balls of light, and gradually sank into the silver balls of light. Seeing that the two balls of light had regained the bright silver color of decades ago, Yu Qingtian had a bad feeling in his heart. -9. Chapter 2599. However, at this moment, the bright silver ball of light suddenly emitted extremely bright red and azure colors. Yu Qingtian involuntarily closed his eyes. When he opened his eyes again, he saw that the two bright silver balls had completely turned into red and azure colors. Woo woo! The azure ball of light did not give Yu Qingtian any time to hesitate. With a strange sword hum, the ball of light emitted rays of brilliance, and the brilliance condensed into the beautiful figure of Zhang Yuhe in midair. Sect Master Yu, thank you for your help, Zhang Yuhe said indifferently. Now that my Six Directions Yin spirit is ready, and the Six Directions Yang spirit of your Foundation Establishment Stage Boy is also ready, we can carry out the last blood sacrifice. As long as the blood and souls of the last living creatures are sent into the sword spirits, these two sword spirits will have the initial spiritual intelligence. Then, our cooperation will be successful. Then, Zhang Yuhe, who was in the sword shadow, raised her head slightly, looked at the silver sky above her head, and said, in addition, I can also help you attract the sword energy and sword intent of the sword catacomb, and help the disciples of the Yu family of fallen gold mountain turn stone into gold. Consider it a little sincerity from me. After saying that, the sword light flashed and scattered, like flying flowers scattering on the ground, fell into the ball of light, and disappeared. Yu Qingtian forced a smile on his face, but when he heard the last sentence, embarrassment appeared on his face, and even surprise appeared in his eyes. Yu Qingtian was stunned. The silver tiger in his hand moved, but it did not send out any signal. Guji, there seemed to be a light bell-like sound, and a smiling Zhang Yuhe's beautiful face appeared on the azure ball of light. Sect Master Yu, why are you hesitating? If you feel that it is inappropriate, you can ask your little Foundation Establishment Stage cultivator. I will cover my ears. Whoosh! Similarly, dozens of red sword lights flew out of the red ball of light, and a faintly discernible figure of Yu Tong appeared. Sect Master, Yu Tong's somewhat helpless voice sounded. There is no need to hesitate at this time. Now that things have come to this, we have no choice but to release the arrow from the bow. Sect Master, you should carry out the last blood sacrifice. All right, be careful. A hint of bitterness appeared on Yu Qingtian's face. He looked at the azure brilliance and saw Zhang Yuhe covering her ears with her hands. With a wave of his hand, the silver tiger emitted a bright silver light. Tens of thousands of silver rays shot out from the silver tiger's mouth and rushed straight to Yu Qingtian's feet. They passed through the silver clouds and landed on a large area below him. The strange thing was that the places where these light beams landed were exactly the huts where Xiaohua and the others were. Moreover, every light beam landed on a hut. Wong wong, a deafening sound was emitted from these rays of light. Along with this sound, the rays of light began to vibrate. Along with this vibration, more than 10,000 small houses separated from the Silver Palace. Unexpectedly, each small house became an independent small silver lattice. This lattice was very strange. It had edges and corners, and actually looked like a hexahedron. Following these tens of thousands of light particles, after these silver lattices separated, they did not fly up into the air. Instead, they slowly sank, and the entire square became a huge hole. Below the hole was not a soil layer, but a large area of silver brilliance. These tens of thousands of lattices slowly moved in this silver brilliance, like stars in the sky. They gradually formed a mysterious magic array, and then stopped. When all the lattices stopped moving, with a whoosh, all the silver light particles returned to Yu Qingtian's silver tiger. Yu Qingtian rested for a moment, then shook his hand again. The silver tiger emitted light particles from all over, and several silver rays as thick as a fist rushed down, aiming at the surroundings of the huge hole. Whoosh, 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 the silver rays landed on the doors around the hole, then turned into rainbows, becoming thumb-sized rainbows that hit the doors. The doors also began to shake violently. The rainbows swept past the rooms behind the doors, and the silver houses also slowly floated up. After a while, about 9 silver houses floated up from the huge hole, and the silver brilliance immediately covered these houses. However, the tens of thousands of lattices were at the bottom of the silver brilliance, and these 9 houses were above these lattices, surrounding them. After everything was done, Yu Qingtian sat down cross-legged, clapped his hands, and took out an elixir and put it into his mouth. Sect Master Yu, you should still improve your cultivation. Zhang Yue jumped out, and a beautiful sword-like figure fluttered on the azure light ball. Why don't this sword lend you a hand in a while? Humph. In order to cooperate with you. This old man has racked my brains for decades. When did I have the time to cultivate in seclusion? Yu Qingtian snorted coldly, opened his eyes slightly, and said, instead of helping this old man, you ridiculed me. This old man is starting to doubt your sincerity in cooperating with me. Hee, isn't this sword just going to lend you a hand? Zhang Yue giggled. Obviously, she was very happy because the sword spirit was about to be formed. Yu Qingtian was stunned, and immediately realized that he had misspoken, so he closed his eyes and ignored Zhang Yue. Zhang Yue's figure danced in the azure ball of light for a long while. Then, she suddenly transformed into an azure flying sword. Kong, a crisp sword cry rang out. She directly rushed towards the silver-white sky above the space. Following the emergence of the azure flying sword, a slightly smaller scarlet flying sword also flew out from the scarlet light ball. Similarly, a clang, clang sound was heard. The 2 flying swords rushed into the space, one in front and one behind, one in green and one in red. The scarlet flying sword rushed into the brilliance of the azure flying sword like a swallow, returning to its nest. The 2 swords intertwined with each other, and with a resounding clang sound, they quickly pierced toward the silver-white sky. An incomparably sharp and invincible sword essence quickly overflowed in the entire space. Humph, this little girl's cultivation has improved a lot again. Yu Qingtian opened his eyes helplessly, as if he was already familiar with Zhang Yue's move. As he muttered to himself, he did not forget to take a look at the scarlet light ball. He saw that the sword runes on the light ball were similar to the azure light ball, but it did not have Zhang Yue's arrogant figure. Go! Yu Qingtian shook his silver tiger, and a faint silver light was emitted from it. The silver light swayed slightly and vibrated with a strange fluctuation. The silver light did not chase after the green and red sword light. Instead, it shone in all directions, and the fluctuation fell below Yu Qingtian's body. The ripples had already landed on the silver canopy beneath Yu Qingtian, and it immediately began to vibrate. The vibrations quickly filled the entire space, and very soon, they surpassed the flying sword and reached the canopy that the flying sword was about to stab. Almost without any sound, the sky suddenly split open like a pair of sharp scissors cutting through silk, revealing the clear night sky beyond the sky. At this moment, the stars were shining brightly in the night sky, and a crescent moon hung in the sky like a boat. The azure and red flying swords crossed the sky and rushed straight into the night sky. Not only did the dazzling sword light illuminate the entire night sky, but the clang of the sword also resounded throughout the 9 heavens. Woo! As soon as the azure and red flying swords appeared, all the broken swords within 100 miles responded. Countless mournful cries were heard from the sword tomb, as if they were crying and surrendering. A swordsman? Far away from the sword tomb, LV Ruochang and the other third-grade illusory swordsmen were fleeing toward the sword tomb in a panic. Suddenly, they saw a strong sword essence rushing out of the sword tomb and arousing their sword spirits. The sword origin in their bodies surged, and their flying swords also cried out, wanting to rush out of their bodies. They all turned pale with fright. Yes, how could they not turn pale with fright? According to their thinking, the hundreds of thousands of Dao sect cultivators and dozens of golden core cultivators in the meeting hall had been led by the nose to the sword tomb. If they appeared out of nowhere and transformed into swords, how could those Dao sect cultivators fall into their trap? Wouldn't the appearance of the sword transformation master alert the enemy? Besides, the location of the sword transformation master was different from the direction of the sword formation that LV Ruochang had set up. Once LV Ruochang entered the sword tomb, would he go in the direction of the sword transformation master's sword essence? Or would he go in the direction of the sword formation? In an instant, LV Ruochang made a decision. She waved her hand and said, "Let's go. Let's fly to the place where the sword transformation master appeared. Otherwise, those Taoist sect practitioners will be able to tell that we haven't really lost. They will be able to discover our plan to lure the enemy." Yes, the surrounding swordsmen were also helpless. They passed the order to each other and hurriedly searched for a route, preparing to fly toward the Yu family in the falling gold mountain. But right at this moment, the sword transformation master's aura suddenly disappeared, as though it had never appeared. Sigh, LV Ruochang sighed. However, she knew that this was the real sword transformation master's sword essence. It was majestic and abnormally fresh. It was definitely not some broken sword essence from the sword tomb. Even if she couldn't lure all the Taoist sect practitioners into the sword formation that she had set up, she definitely couldn't blame this sword transformation master who appeared out of nowhere. Since LV Ruochang had sensed this sword transformation master's sword essence, the Jindan practitioners in the conference hall naturally sensed it as well. Gao Wei from the Seven Skills sect was the first to stop. He hurriedly sent a message to Lu Xinwu of the Splendid sect, reminding them that a sword transformation master with strength comparable to a nascent soul practitioner had appeared. Soon, the hundreds of thousands of practitioners stopped as LV Ruochang had expected. They pondered whether they should continue the pursuit or not. All kinds of communication talismans flew around in the air. Not long after, the Jindan practitioners in the conference hall gathered together again. Gao Wei, who was the first to discover this, didn't wait for the others to speak and shouted. A sword transformation master actually appeared in the sword tomb. This can only mean one thing. This is the reinforcements of the Huan country swordsmen. I suggest that we chase to this place and resolutely not to chase into the sword tomb. -9. Chapter 2600. Heng Zhao did not answer. Instead, he narrowed his eyes and looked in the direction of the Brahma Golden Palace and the direction in which the sword cultivators had fled. He seemed to be deep in thought. After everyone had discussed for a while, Heng Zhao asked, "What cultivator Gao said makes sense. However, I would like to ask, if the sword cultivators had a hidden hand in the sword tomb, would the swordsman who transformed into a sword be exposed? Besides, can a swordsman who transformed into a sword participate in the battle now? Perhaps it is not a swordsman who transformed into a sword, but it must be a hidden hand of the sword cultivators." Gao Wei, of course, also realized this point and immediately cried out. However, according to what I know, the sword cultivators did not flee in the direction of the sword light. They fled in a different direction. Sun said with a smile. It seems that they saw the sword light and changed their direction. Regardless of whether it is a hidden hand or not, the sword cultivators may have other hidden hands in the sword tomb other than our Taoist sect's array. I do not recommend advancing rashly, Lu Xinwu said. Actually, according to the sword cultivator's final change of direction, the sword light should not be a hidden hand. Heng Zhao said with a smile. It is very likely that it is a swordsman who transformed into a sword. These sword cultivators are grasping at the last straw and want to transform into a sword to save them. Yes, that's right. Other than Gao Wei and Lu Xinwu, 80% of the remaining cultivators agreed with Heng Zhao. After all, they had seen the sword cultivators suddenly change direction. Do we have to face the swordsman directly? Zhu Jun of the Cool Breeze Valley, who had just recovered from his serious injuries, said in a low voice, So what if we face the swordsman? Can they make a move? Li Jijie of the Changbai sect said proudly, I would like to see the swordsman kill both of us. Haha, even if he transformed into a sword, he will not attack. Those sword cultivators have really lost. They are panicking, Sun said with a smile. Actually, there is one more thing. Heng Zhao continued. This sword tomb is truly huge. Although my Dao sect's 10-direction annihilation formation covers over 50 kilometers, it is still insignificant within this sword tomb. This is something that we did not consider when we were discussing setting up a large formation to ambush sword cultivators within the sword tomb. We are chasing after the sword cultivators, but how can we lure them into the large array? I was just discussing this matter with senior brother Sun. The direction that the sword cultivator fled in is completely different from the location of the great array. We can either stop chasing him or chase him in the direction of the great array. However, before the two of us could come to a conclusion, the sword light appeared. Although it wasn't in the direction of the formation, it wasn't far from it. Everyone, do you think that the heavens are helping my Dao sect? Hehe. Or is it fellow Daoist Xiong's generosity in the sword tomb? Yuan Zhongyu of the Kunlun sect laughed. Anyway, the sword cultivator is heading towards the 10-direction annihilation formation that my Dao sect has set up a long time ago. Do you think we should chase after him or not? Heng Li asked loudly. Many gold core stage cultivators had a little discussion. Under the situation where most of the cultivators agreed, they passed down the order of the conference hall and hundreds of thousands of cultivators continued to chase into the sword tomb. LV Ruochong and the other swordsmen were even more delighted when they saw the cultivators chasing after them. However, in order not to arouse the suspicion of the cultivators, they still headed in the direction of the Brahma Gold Palace. When the time was right, they would turn in the direction of their own great array. The green and red sword light that had changed the entire situation of the battle between the Dao cultivators paused in midair for a moment before suddenly descending and landing on the two balls of light. However, things did not end with the fall of the two sword lights. The incomplete sword essence within 100 miles of the sword light flashed with all kinds of sword lights and flew toward the two balls of light. Even the gold-type spiritual energy of heaven and earth in the sword tomb rushed over with the sword light with its unique tyranny, setting off countless hurricanes within 100 miles. The hurricane's target was the Brahma Gold Great Array. Yu Qingtian, who had already opened the sky canopy of the Brahma Gold Great Array, could no longer close his eyes and meditate at this time. He activated his magic power and cast a spell. The silver tiger turned into a tiger about a foot long and flew into the sky. It opened its mouth and thousands of silver threads rushed into the sky canopy, covering the entire area where the great array had been torn apart just now. Woo-woo! Countless sword lights surged and sword chi surged. The incomplete flying sword carried the incomplete sword essence and rushed into the silver light canopy above the great array. The light canopy was pressed into a concave shape, but with the support of the silver tiger, it was still stable. At this time, the true face of the Brahma Gold Great Array was revealed. The array was an oval-shaped silver space that was filled with a silver brilliance. At the top of this space was the silver tiger, the magic weapon that controlled the great array. In the center of the great array were the two balls of light of the great yin-yang six directions sword spirit. They were slightly lower than the other balls of light. They were 9 silver areas, which were the rooms where the disciples of the Yu family of fallen gold mountain cultivated. He had already set his goal of comprehension on the primordial spirit sword controlling technique and the sword heart. Planting the sword intent into the sword spirit and letting one's soul combine with the sword spirit, only then can one become one with the flying sword. The sword heart is the heart of the flying sword. This heart is the soul of the person who transformed into the sword, and the flying sword is the body of the sword. Isn't this the same as the cultivation goal of a weapon cultivator? Xiao Hua instantly thought of Ji Yi, who had integrated the seal of overturning the sea. It's no wonder that the Dao sect treats sword cultivators as abnormal. Dao sect cultivators nourish their true qi and use it to condense a core in the dantian. They also use the core to nourish their qi and communicate with the yin and yang of heaven and earth. They nurture a baby in the golden core. When the baby is born, they nourish it with the qi of heaven and earth and strengthen it. When the baby grows up, the baby and the physical body, Xiao Hua thought happily, as if he could feel the superiority of the Dao sect. However, when he thought of the realms after the nascent soul stage, although he still didn't have the true spirit severing technique, he suddenly woke up and cold sweat seeped out of his body. Damn it, that's not right. If that's the case, then in the end, the nascent soul, isn't it the same thing as the sword heart? He had already faintly sensed this idea when he was meditating after the secret auction. However, he didn't think too much about it. Now that he had obtained more secret techniques and comprehended more, he thought about it again and felt a lot of emotions. That is to say, no matter what sword cultivator, weapon cultivator, beast cultivator, or Dao sect cultivator, in the end, they will all return to the same place. Xiao Hua sighed. Then what about the Buddhist sect? It seems there is a difference. I can't see it now. What about Confucian cultivators? What about soul cultivators? Devil cultivators? There is no such thing as an infant in a devil cultivator. They only cultivate devil fire and devil blood. I'm afraid only Zhang Qingxiao herself knows what level she will reach in the end. It had to be said that this was the shortcoming of Xiao Hua's dabbling in too many things. When he had a little enlightenment in one direction, he would immediately have some ideas in other directions. Whether these ideas were right or wrong, and whether they could help his cultivation, he himself didn't know. -9. Chapter 26:01. Of course, on the other hand, if Xiao Hua could comprehend all of his cultivation techniques by analogy, it would be extremely beneficial to his cultivation. Let's not talk about anything else. Take flying swords as an example. Xiao Hua himself understood the art of swords playing the world, and he himself knew the art of transforming flying swords. After coming into contact with the sword arts of sword cultivators, his flying swords cultivation improved by leaps and bounds. It was simply not something that ordinary swordsmen could hope to catch up to. Just when Xiao Hua had some comprehension, he suddenly felt that there were some changes in the small house. It actually started to tremble slightly, and an indescribable fluctuation spread throughout the small house. Xiao Hua used his divine sense to investigate and immediately understood. Isn't this the fluctuation mentioned in the secret technique? Could it be this so-called Midas touch is real? In order to expand their influence and even establish a sect, this fallen gold mountains Yu family spent a lot of money? If that's really the case, then this young master has indeed wronged the Yu family and even the fallen gold mountains Yu family. Xiao Hua was someone who knew when to correct his mistakes. He was rather lucky that when he entered the small house, he did not suddenly disappear or make a move to create some trouble for this Midas touch. If this young master is able to benefit from this, I'm afraid that I will really help them in the future. However, is there really a foundation establishment pill in this world that would appear out of nowhere? However, Xiao Hua immediately laughed in his heart. Since this place cannot confine this young master, it won't be difficult for this young master to escape from here. Let's just wait and see how it disintegrates. Thinking about this, Xiao Hua activated the secret technique in the jade slip. A suction force that was neither large nor small rushed out from his body and was transmitted into the fluctuation. Through this fluctuation, A suction force was produced from the small box and rushed up to the space above. Shua, a dense metal attribute spiritual energy passed through the small house and filled Xiaohua's surroundings. Xiaohua secretly nodded his head and activated the secret technique. The metal attribute spiritual energy was indeed drawn into his body. However, when he reached this point, Xiaohua stopped and thought to himself, if it was someone else, with this kind of breathing and drawing spiritual energy into their body, their cultivation would definitely be impressive. However, what benefits does this kind of thin stream of metal attribute spiritual energy have to me? This young master only needs to activate the celestial body bestowment technique, and the metal attribute spiritual energy in the house will probably all be sucked into my body. Forget it, Xiaohua said with a smile. Let's use this secret technique to see if there is any special shady business. Thinking this, Xiaohua once again stimulated his cultivation method. The heaven and earth spiritual energy entered his body and was gradually tempered by Xiaohua's cultivation method. Sure enough, a faint trace of true essence was slowly born. This true essence was not as tyrannical as Xiaohua had imagined. It was similar to the true essence refined from ordinary heaven and earth spiritual energy. Oh, this Midas is Midas long as the secret technique. The Midas heavenly spiritual energy, it would have been tyrannical nature spiritual energy. Most of the metal was the tyrannical nature was. There was tyrannical nature was tyrannical and was not great to the sword cultivators to the sword, and sword to the to cultivate to the cultivators to be. However, for the Yu family of Falling Gold Mountain to be able to establish such a large scale and do shady business of turning stone into gold, it was not out of Xiaohua's expectations that this secret technique would be able to turn the tyrannical nature of the metal attribute spiritual energy back into ordinary metal attribute spiritual energy. Who would have thought that the moment Xiaohua's smile appeared, it would freeze again? Along with the influx of the gold-attributed spiritual energy of heaven and earth, some fragmented sword intent mixed with the sword energy formed from the gold-attributed spiritual energy of heaven and earth also swarmed into the small room. Once Xiaohua's skin came in contact with the sharp sword energy and the rather familiar sword intent, an extremely cold feeling emerged from his skin and directly entered the bottom of his heart. This coldness was like a bolt of lightning flashing through his mind. No, that's not right. This secret technique is far more than this. The smile on Xiaohua's face was instantly shattered and was replaced with shock or even surprise. However, he didn't have time to think too much about it. He hurriedly urged the secret technique to absorb the bits of shattered sword intent and sword chi into his body and began to refine them with the secret technique. However, just as he was about to transform the sword chi into true essence with great difficulty, Xiaohua had another thought. He changed the last part of the secret technique that was used to transform true essence to the sword technique used by sword cultivators to condense sword origin. Indeed, it was extremely difficult to convert sword chi into true essence. However, not only was it easy to convert sword chi into true essence, the amount of sword chi was also many times more than true essence. Xiaohua stored the strand of sword chi into his body and unknowingly clenched one hand into a fist and the other hand into a palm. His face revealed a look of ecstasy. Fuck. This, the Yu family of Falling Gold Mountain, is definitely not an ordinary cultivation family. What a strange secret technique. How is it possible for an ordinary cultivation family to possess such a technique? Xiaohua almost cried out in shock. This sword intent is a swordsman's understanding of the flying sword. It is the soul of the flying sword in a swordsman's heart. When a swordsman refines his sword intent, he will also gradually condense his soul into the sword intent. In this sword tomb, there are countless sword intents, whether they are nurturing swords, shining swords, or illusory swords. All of these sword intents are damaged and deeply engraved with the soul of the deceased swordsman. These sword intents cannot be used by a swordsman normally, but this Falling Gold Mountain's Yu family is actually able to shatter these sword intents and erase the imprint of the soul, leaving behind only the pure sword intent. To a swordsman, the sword intent and sword spirit are more or less fused together. Furthermore, this sword intent has a sword spirit, and it is unavoidable that the spiritual energy of heaven and earth can be condensed into sword chi. And this sword chi, through this secret technique, can be converted into sword origin. Especially the sword chi with the fragmented sword intent. It is just like refining a pill. If a cultivator wants to take this pill, they can only absorb a small portion. But what about a swordsman? They should be able to absorb all of it. This young master has always been unable to form sword intent because I do not have sword origin. Now there is a ready-made opportunity. Others want to convert it into true essence, but this young master does not need it and directly absorbs it to form sword origin. This is really dog shit luck. Thinking about this, Xiao Hua's mind became active again, and he could not help but deviate again. But why don't those sword cultivators of the Huan country have this kind of secret technique? Also, that little deer sword intent of Taoist bright sword. Forget it. What's the point of thinking so much? Xiao Hua hurriedly suppressed his curiosity and activated the secret technique to begin drawing in the sword chi and fragmented sword intent. Of course, after a short moment, Xiao Hua slapped his forehead again and activated the immortal body bestowment technique. An extremely powerful suction force was born from his body. Whatever the metal attribute spiritual energy of heaven and earth, whatever fragmented sword intent, whatever sword chi, whatever they were all sucked into his body like a taotai opening its mouth. Then, he activated the secret technique and the speed at which sword origin was produced increased by a lot. When Xiao Hua activated the immortal body bestowment technique, the suction force of the small grid naturally increased by a lot, and even more sword intent fragments and sword chi were snatched over. However, this suction force was still not enough compared to the overall suction force of the small grid. It did not cause any abnormalities at all, and it was impossible to be noticed by Yu Qingtian or Zhang Yuhe. The sword chi and sword intent in the sword catacomb seemed to be endless. Zhang Yue's sword spirit had been withdrawn for a long time, but the sword chi and sword intent that were pouring in did not stop. However, the layer of silver grid that Yu Qingtian's silver tiger had scattered in the sky could not support it. Moreover, such a big movement in the sword catacomb could easily attract the attention of others. Yu Qingtian grabbed with his hand, and several silver brilliants flashed on his right hand. The silver tiger roared and rushed to the sky. The brilliance around its body shone brightly, and a shadow of a silver tiger appeared. It slowly flew to the grid and blocked the flying swords and other objects that were rushing in. When it was level with the grid, the shadow turned into a ray of brilliance and merged into the grid. Immediately, the flaw of the large formation was repaired. Haha, Zhang Yue's smile flashed on the azure light ball again. Lord Yu, it's only been a few hours. The vital essence that you've absorbed is not enough to raise your cultivation level, right? Why did you turn off the large formation so early? Hehe, this is not the usual time. Yu Qingtian did not care about Zhang Yuhe's ridicule. The battle between Taoist cultivators is here. Swordsmen and city guards of Sky Patrol City often pass by the edge of the sword catacomb. It's best not to make any noise. With that, Yu Qingtian stretched out his hand, and the silver tiger fell into his hand. Silver light flashed all over his body, and a large number of light beams were emitted from the silver tiger, hitting various parts of the sky. The silver light above the large formation flashed violently at first, and then it began to rotate. After the time it took to smoke a cigarette, it finally stopped. Zhang Yuhe's face was solemn as she hovered above the azure light. She knew that the Buddhist golden array controlled by Silver Tiger was constantly changing. Even if a swordsman were to pass by, he would not be able to find any trace of the array. It was just as Xiao Hua thought. How could a cultivation family with such a wonderful secret technique not have a wonderful concealment formation? However, the seriousness only flashed across Zhang Yue's face for a moment and was immediately replaced by a sneer. Zhang Yuhe's beautiful figure also disappeared from the azure light ball. It seemed that Yu Qingtian had consumed a lot of his magic power to conceal the large formation again. After Yu Qingtian swallowed an elixir, he said gently, "Little friend Zhang, now that everything is ready, can we start the last blood sacrifice? I've been ready for a long time." You'd better ask your foundation establishment boy first. Zhang Yuhe did not show her face, but only sent her voice out. Yu Qingtian looked at the crimson ball of light again. The ball of light was similar to the azure brilliance, and many sword talismans appeared on it. The sword talismans were stacked on top of each other, and no one knew how many layers and sword talismans there were. Yu Tong, are you ready? Yu Qingtian's figure floated in front of the red light ball. Sword light flashed on the light ball, and a faint figure appeared. Yu Tong seemed to be weak, but he seemed to be supporting himself. He said, "Granduncle, the boy can barely control the sword spirit, so he should be able to withstand a blood sacrifice. If this blood sacrifice succeeds, the boy's cultivation will definitely reach the peak of the late foundation establishment stage, and he will be able to control the sword spirit." -9. Chapter 2602. All right, since that's the case, let's not delay any further. Yu Qingtian nodded slightly. The Yu family of Fallen Gold Mountain has been preparing for decades. Today, we'll do it in one go. Yes, boy, I'll follow your arrangements. Yu Tong's figure slowly disappeared. It was far less elegant than Zhang Yuhe's disappearance. Yu Qingtian watched as Yu Tong's figure disappeared, and a hint of hesitation appeared on his face. However, after a moment, he turned around again and took a few steps forward solemnly. With a wave of his hand, the silver tiger landed in front of him. The silver tiger was like a real white tiger. It shook its head and wagged its tail in midair. Even the scattered light on its body shook in the wind like a tiger's fur. Yu Qingtian took a deep breath and slapped his hand on his chest. He opened his mouth and spat out a mouthful of blood essence. The blood essence fell in midair and was about to turn into droplets. Yu Qingtian grabbed with his hand, and the blood essence condensed into a ball and stopped. Yu Qingtian then chanted a strange incantation. The same obscure incantation slowly appeared on his hands. As a faint silver light fell on the blood essence gradually became smaller and its color gradually deepened. After 10 minutes, the blood essence was almost invisible, but its color was almost pitch black. Go! Yu Qingtian raised his hands with difficulty as if he was holding up a mountain. The pitch black dot slowly rose from its original place. As Yu Qingtian moved his hand, it hit the silver tiger's forehead. With a soft bang, a black-red mark appeared on the silver tiger's forehead. It was long and flat, like a third eye. The silver tiger also instantly lost its vitality and stopped in midair in a daze. Yu Qingtian's face was a little pale, and there was even a drop of sweat on his temples. However, Yu Qingtian did not have time to wipe it off. With a wave of his hand, the silver tiger landed in front of him. Yu Qingtian reached out, and his hand slowly went into the mark on the silver tiger's forehead. Strangely, the mark was only the size of a thumb, but Yu Qingtian's hand went in very easily. When Yu Qingtian took out his hand, a fist-sized blood-red crystal appeared in his hand. This crystal was emitting a blood-red brilliance. It was extremely bewitching. There were countless folds on it, and when the silver light shone on it, it reflected countless rays of brilliance. However, all of these silver rays of light had turned blood-red. Yu Qingtian only glanced at the blood-red crystal for a moment before he felt an extremely heart-piercing bewitchment coming from it. He had an impulse to rush into it. He didn't dare to look at it again and hurriedly moved his eyes away. He loosened his grip and the blood-red crystal flew into the air. As soon as Yu Qingtian loosened his grip, a blood-red curtain of light automatically flew out from the crystal. In an instant, it sprinkled over the entire space. Not only did it force the silver brilliance to the edge of the magic circle, but it also fell on the lowest level of the magic circle, where the thousands of small squares were located. However, at this time, the blood-red brilliance only covered the entire area. Under the light screen, the small grid was suffused with a strange blood-red color. Young friend Zhang, Yu Tong, this old man is going to start. Yu Qingtian turned his head slightly, looked at the two balls of light not far away, and reminded them, "Yes, the boy is ready." Yu Tong's voice rang out. A moment later, Zhang Yue's voice also rang out, "Sect Master Yu, This is the last blood sacrifice, and also the most important one. You and I have worked together very happily for the past few decades. I do not wish for any mishaps to occur at the final juncture. This old man understands. Yu Qingtian replied faintly, young friend Zhang. How would you know about the effort this old man has put in? This old man hopes that nothing will go wrong on your side. Haha. Zhang Yuhe chuckled again. Yu Qingtian ignored her and stretched out his hand. An extremely strange spell was formed in his hand, and with a flip of his hand, he hit his chest. Puff. A mouthful of blood essence with a silver brilliance spurted out, and Yu Qingtian's face instantly turned abnormally pale. Go. Yu Qingtian bit his lips slightly and grabbed with his hand. The ball of blood essence turned into a bloody shadow that was very similar to a tiger's and rushed toward the blood-red crystal. Buzz. The moment the blood essence touched the blood-red crystal, it immediately seeped in. A blood-red brilliance that was 100 times more intense than before bloomed on the crystal. The brilliance didn't spread far and only lingered a few inches to the left of the crystal. The countless facets of the crystal gave birth to countless brilliances, and it swayed in and out like a blood-red stamen. Yu Qingtian chanted a strange spell again, and a faint layer of blood-red mixed with black gas was produced from his glabella, slowly covering his entire face. After waiting for the time it took to drink a cup of tea, drops of silver light appeared on Yu Qingtian's hand. There was a layer of blood-red spots on the silver light. Yu Qingtian carefully touched the blood-red stamen with his hand, and it was extremely gentle. Pa. The silver light dripped onto the stamen. Buzz. The entire blood-red space vibrated, and endless fluctuations rippled from the stamen. The stamen also suddenly opened. Shwa. As the stamen bloomed, another blood-red crystal was revealed. The stamen was like a flying dandelion, turning into thousands of blood threads that fell on the thousands of small squares. It was through the red light that the thousands of small squares were stuck one by one. Xiaohua, who was in the small squares, naturally didn't know that the blood sacrifice had begun. He was proudly activating the immortal body bestowment technique and the secret technique of the Yu family to refine the sword energy. However, the moment Yu Qingtian closed the Buddhist gold formation, the sword essence and sword chi that were pouring in stopped. Xiaohua was quite stunned. However, the jade slip also stated clearly that there were other fluctuations behind it, which meant that there were still other secret techniques cooperating with it. However, after this secret technique was condensed into true origin energy, Xiaohua only took a rough look at it before abandoning it. After all, he could use the sword technique of a sword cultivator. So who would use this useless thing? Now that the sword chi had stopped, it didn't take long for the fluctuations mentioned in the jade slip to appear again. Xiaohua thought for a moment, then followed the instructions of the secret technique and activated his inexplicable cultivation method. He wanted to see if there were any other surprises waiting for him. Sure enough, the Yu family of the fallen gold mountain gave Xiaohua a great surprise. Just as Xiaohua activated this cultivation method, a burst of qi and blood surged up. The true origin that he had refined earlier suddenly changed and rapidly rushed into his blood vessels. What is this? Xiaohua was puzzled. Could it be that he wants to intensify the true bloodline? Feeling the blood vessels in his body begin to boil, and it was indeed somewhat similar to the awakening of Cui Hongshan's true bloodline. Xiaohua didn't think much about it and only smiled bitterly to himself. This young master doesn't have a true bloodline. However, at this moment, high in the sky where the blood sacrifice was taking place, Yu Qingtian opened his hand and covered the blood-red crystal. He opened his mouth and spat out a mouthful of silver blood essence. The blood-red and black mist covering Yu Qingtian's face also fell into the crystal along with the blood essence. Yu Qingtian seemed to have grabbed a heavy object, and with just a slight lift on the blood-red crystal, the crystal immediately began to emit blood-red smoke. Seeing the smoke rising, Yu Qingtian was relieved. He sat down next to the crystal, took out a medicinal pill, and sent it into the air. Then, he closed his eyes slightly. Obviously, even a gold core cultivator like him couldn't bear the consumption of energy in that short moment. The blood-red crystal, along with the appearance of the smoke, began to tremble. The smoke also turned into thousands of thin strands and rushed into the thousands of blood sacrifice grids along with the blood-red light. Xiao Hua, who was in the grids, suddenly felt a suction force pass through the hut and cover him. Under this suction force, the boiling blood vessels were about to rush out of his body. This is bad. At this point, even if Xiao Hua didn't want to judge a gentleman with the yardstick of a villain, he couldn't help but be vigilant. He hurriedly stopped the secret technique and wanted to use his cultivation method to stop the qi and blood that was gushing out. As the golden light around Xiao Hua's body flashed, the light protecting his body resisted the suction force, and the qi and blood that were about to seep out of his body also gradually fell back. This won't do. Who knows what kind of shady business this Yu family is up to? I'd better get out of here quickly. Xiao Hua made a prompt decision. He took out the spiritual talisman again and urged his magical power to hit the wall like before. However, contrary to Xiao Hua's expectations, when the spiritual talisman landed on the wall emitted a blood-red light, and the jade talisman was bounced back. The spiritual talisman seemed to be unable to penetrate the wall. This is bad. Xiao Hua's heart trembled, and he thought to himself, this is bad. Then, he took out another jade talisman, but it still couldn't penetrate the wall. Damn it, this young master has been hunting wild geese all my life, but now, my eyes have been pecked by a wild goose. Xiao Hua smiled bitterly. This young master was only thinking about how to find out the dirty tricks of the Yu family, but I didn't expect to fall into the Yu family's trap. This hut is so strange. What kind of good thing can happen? This young master got a small advantage, but actually suffered such a big loss. This wall is turning blood red at this time. There must be some unforeseen event. Right at this moment, the suction force that was blocked by Xiao Hua's protective golden light suddenly increased, and the blood-red light emitted from the wall once again, gradually filling up the entire hut. Without any hesitation, Xiao Hua threw the jade talisman in his hand into the air. In a few breaths of time, the rabbit formation was laid out, and the suction force was negated by a little. However, Xiao Hua could already sense that the rabbit formation was not able to completely block the suction force, and the strange suction force was still sucking in the blood of Xiao Hua's body through the formation. I'm afraid that they have other plans. Xiao Hua hurriedly thought of another method, but in the blink of an eye, the suction force increased once again, as though it was stronger than before. At this moment, the suction force was so strong that it exceeded Xiao Hua's expectations, and he was a little flustered. The techniques of the Dao sect were all used to stabilize one's inner yuan and defend one's magical power. Very few of them were effective against attacking one's blood meridians. Apart from breaking the hut and escaping from this blood sacrifice formation, Xiao Hua did not have any other good methods. -9. Chapter 26:03. In a moment of desperation, Xiao Hua came to a realization. He was definitely not the only cultivator who had fallen into the trap of the Yu family of Fallen Gold Mountain. This small hut was definitely not the focus of the Yu family's attack. In other words, even if he left the small hut, the outside of the small hut was where the suction force was. If he couldn't find a way to deal with the suction force and escape from the area of the blood sacrifice, he would still end up in the same situation as he was in the small hut. The suction force grew stronger and stronger. Xiao Hua could almost feel his qi and blood seeping out of his blood vessels and slowly flying out of his physical body. He also felt as though he was floating in the air. However, this was just a feeling. It was as though his blood vessels were bound by something and couldn't completely seep out. Or perhaps, the suction force was still too weak. However, Xiao Hua didn't have time to think too much about it. The suction force increased once again. Even the blood threads that had just entered the small house suddenly descended from the sky and covered his head. Within the blood threads, there was actually something similar to a soul thread that directly penetrated his scalp and approached the location of his soul in the mysterious dark cloud. Soul? Blood sacrifice? If it was just his qi and blood surging out, Xiao Hua might not have thought of blood sacrifice. However, How could Xiao Hua not think of something similar to a soul thread directly facing his soul? Damn the Yu family of fallen Gold Mountain. They actually dare to carry out a blood sacrifice here. They really deserve to die. Damn. Damn. A trace of fierceness flashed in Xiao Hua's eyes. He actually shouted damn 4 times in a row. It was obvious that he hated this blood sacrifice to the extreme. Since he knew that it was a blood sacrifice, Xiao Hua slapped his forehead and the soul thread stretched out like a tentacle. The soul thread's fluctuation was already so strong that it easily swept away the blood threads that were similar to soul threads. Xiao Hua even released his soul thread again and surrounded him. Waves of strong fluctuations were emitted and blocked the strong suction force. Yu Qingtian spat out a mouthful of blood essence on the blood-colored crystal. Countless wisps of smoke were produced and turned into thousands of thin wisps that rushed into the thousands of blood sacrifice grids along with the blood light. In the blink of an eye, thousands of drops of blood essence were sucked out from the thousands of small cells. Hysterical howls could be heard from the drops of blood essence. Fresh souls were struggling and roaring, trying to break free from the drops of blood essence and escape from the bloody light. Unfortunately, the suction force of the blood-red light was so great that even Xiao Hua was almost unable to resist it. Most of these cultivators were aura-refining cultivators, so they simply didn't have any means to resist it. They followed the blood-red light and rushed into the vicinity of the blood-red crystal. Shua. At this moment, sword runes began to circulate above the azure ball of light. Countless flying swords rushed out of the ball of light and surrounded the azure ball of light. Go! Zhang Yuha's crisp and cold command was heard, and all the sword lights immediately pierced towards the blood-red crystal. Little brat Yutong, if you're not coming to help this sword, what are you waiting for? Following Zhang Yuha's command, hundreds of sword lights also flew out from the scarlet ball of light and pierced towards the blood-red crystal. When the red and azure sword lights pierced about a foot away from the crystal, the blood-red brilliance on the crystal flourished, and the sound of buzzing also became louder. A ball of blood-red light covered the crystal, blocking the sword lights 1 foot away. Close, Zhang Yuha gave an order, and the azure and red sword lights rapidly circulated outside the blood-red light shield, covering it. Of course, the blood-red brilliance could also penetrate through the sword lights. The azure and scarlet sword lights cooperated very well. Obviously, this was definitely not the first blood sacrifice. At this moment, the thousands or even tens of thousands of living souls had already flown close to the crystal with their essence and blood. Following Zhang Yuha's soft command, the azure and crimson sword radiance separated into wisps of sword radiance and pierced into these living souls. The living souls let out extremely unpleasant screams and were absorbed by the 2 balls of light along with the sword radiance. Not long after, the 2 balls of light were covered by a layer of blood red. This layer of blood red gradually merged with the balls of light, and the sword talisman that was almost solidified on top of the light also turned into a bright red color. Scandium! Scandium! 2 consecutive sword cries sounded, and the azure Zhang Yuha wearing a blood-red sword outfit flew out from the azure ball of light. The incomparably sharp feeling came from her body, as if she was originally a flying sword. This Zhang Yuha's expression was somewhat sluggish, and her eyes were almost unblinking. However, those eyes were filled with greed as they looked at the thousands of souls that flew out along with the blood threads not far away. Shua! Like a flash of sword light, Zhang Yuha's figure disappeared from the ball of light, and the next time she appeared, she was right in front of the blood-red crystal. Zhang Yuha opened her mouth, and hundreds of sword lights that were thinner than a strand of hair shot out from her mouth, and each of them pierced a soul. The souls struggled and howled as they were swallowed into Zhang Yuha's stomach. At the same time, a crimson Yutong wearing a Taoist robe also flew out from the ball of light. However, this Yutong was much shorter, and even its appearance was somewhat thin. Of course, this Yutong's expression was also sluggish. At the same time Zhang Yuha swallowed the souls, the Yutong also flew to the other side of the crystal, and with the same appearance, it spat out sword lights and swallowed the souls. Ha ha ha. After a while, Zhang Yue's figure became even more voluptuous, and the Yutong's figure also became bigger and even taller. A loud laugh came from the azure ball of light, and another Zhang Yuhe appeared from the ball of light. This Zhang Yuhe was different from the previous Zhang Yuhe. Sword talismans flashed around her body, and her face was filled with joy. That laughter came from her mouth, and it resounded through the entire blood-red space. Rise, Zhang Yuhe gracefully stood on the ball of light like a dragonfly. She casually pointed, and a sword light pierced the sky, piercing through the light curtain that had been sealed long ago. With a loud bang, that sword light actually easily penetrated through. Little friend Zhang, what are you doing? Yu Qingtian originally had his eyes closed, and when he saw Zhang Yue's actions, he couldn't help but cry out in alarm and immediately flew up from the ground. Of course, I'm condensing the sword heart. Zhang Yue stopped laughing and said coldly. Through the gap in the great array that Zhang Yue had created, the torrential rain poured down, and the whistling hurricane also rushed into it. Buzz, buzz, however, this overwhelming torrential rain was still unable to stop the soaring sword will. The broken swords and sword wills within 100 miles were stimulated by this sword will, and they broke through the torrential rain and flew toward the Buddhist gold great array. Little friend Zhang, condensing the sword heart doesn't seem to be within the scope of our cooperation. Yu Qingtian's expression was solemn, and he squinted his eyes slightly as he looked at Zhang Yuhe. Haha, how is it not within the scope of our cooperation? Zhang Yue's cold face squeezed out a smile. The purpose of refining the great yin-yang six-direction sword spirit is to form the sword heart. Only with the sword heart can one step into the sword transformation realm. Okay. Yu Qingtian didn't seem to want to argue with Zhang Yuhe. He pointed his finger at the crimson ball of light and said, since you want to condense the sword heart, what about my Yutong? Why doesn't he come out and condense the sword heart? Him? His cultivation has only just stepped into the illusory sword realm, right? He's still a bit far from condensing the sword heart. Zhang Yuhe said disdainfully. Then, how's the refining of his six directions yang spirit? Yu Qingtian asked again. Take a look for yourself. Zhang Yuhe pointed at the Yutong beside the crimson crystal and said, although it's still weak, it's already on the verge of completion. This sword can be considered to have completed the earliest agreement with you. Oh, Yu Qingtian looked at the Yutong, who was a little sluggish at first, but after devouring the souls and blood essence, his eyes became more and more lively, and he nodded slightly. If that's the case, Yu Qingtian said word by word, the great yin-yang six-direction sword spirit has been successfully refined, and our agreement can be considered to have been completed. Condensing the sword heart is not within the scope of our agreement, so I'm afraid I can't agree to it. Ha ha ha, Zhang Yuhe laughed and said, Sect Master Yu, isn't it bad for both of us to have a falling out at this time? The sword spirit of your Yutong has not been completely refined yet. Yu Qingtian still shook his head. Young friend Zhang, don't think that this old man doesn't know. If you transform into a sword, how can this old man and the others restrain you? If you go back on your words, this old man and the others will. Unfortunately, before Yu Qingtian could finish speaking, Zhang Yuhe laughed nastily and said, if you want to stop this sword now, is it too late? As she spoke, the crimson color around Zhang Yuhe, who was in front of the crimson crystal, became thicker. She pointed at the crimson crystal that was covered by the sword light. The crimson light emitted by the crystal shook violently, and an unparalleled powerful suction force was born from the crimson light. The remaining cultivators in the small square who were bitterly resisting the blood sacrifice could not resist it, and all their souls and blood essence came out of their bodies. This all, naturally, did not include Xiao Hua. However, Xiao Hua's situation was not optimistic. He had just released his soul strands when he silently recited the secret technique of refining the yin-yang gourd during the blood sacrifice in the yin-yang Two Springs mountain that day. He urged the soul strands to resist the powerful power of the blood sacrifice. When the two forces were balanced, he hurriedly waved his hand and took out the wishful staff. After raising it, he was about to smash it toward the small house. But at this time, Zhang Yuhe and Yu Qingtian fell out and accelerated the speed of the blood sacrifice. This blood sacrifice battle was mysterious, so how could Xiao Hua resist it with his soul cultivation power? Suddenly, he felt that the suction force was pulling his soul strands and his blood essence, and even the dark clouds of his soul were about to come out. Xiao Hua's soul was scattered, so how could he still care about destroying the small house? In a hurry, he had an idea. He clapped his hand and took out the yin-yang sword gourd. He swung his hand and put it on top of his head. Xiao Hua had held the yin-yang sword gourd for a long time, but he did not know how to use it. At this time, when he saw the same blood sacrifice as refining them, he had to take it out and try it. -9.